The crystal chandeliers of Haverford House blazed like 1,000 judging eyes. Elena Whitmore stood at the ballroom entrance, her silk gloves damp with sweat she refused to acknowledge. 3 weeks ago, Julian Cartwright had stood before London society and declared his engagement, not to her, but to Lady Pemberton's daughter. 3 weeks, and the scandal still clung to her skin like smoke. "Is that the jilted one?" a voice whispered, not quietly enough. Elena's spine straightened. Let them stare, let them whisper. She'd come tonight because hiding would have been surrender, and she'd be damned before she gave them that satisfaction. Across the room, through the sea of turned heads and barely concealed smirks, a pair of dark eyes met hers. Not pitying, not mocking, just watching. The Duke of Blackthorn, people called him, the ghost who haunted his own title. Something in his gaze made her breath catch, not with hope, but with recognition. Stay with me through this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city name. I want to see how far this tale travels. The morning after the ball, Elena woke to the sound of rain hammering against her bedroom window like an accusation. She lay still, staring at the water-stained ceiling of her cousin's townhouse, where she'd been relegated after the scandal broke. Her father's estate, modest compared to the Cartwright sprawling holdings, had become unbearable after Julian's betrayal. Every corner held a memory she'd rather burn than preserve. "Miss Elena?" Mary, the housemaid, cracked the door open. "Your cousin requests your presence at breakfast." Elena closed her eyes. Margaret meant well, but her pity was suffocating. "Tell her I'll be down shortly." The girl hesitated. "She has visitors." Of course she did. Margaret collected gossip like other women collected china patterns. Elena dragged herself upright, her muscles protesting. She hadn't slept properly since the announcement. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Julian's face. That careful, apologetic expression he'd worn when he told her privately, 2 days before making it public. "You understand, don't you, Elena? Father's business ventures in Manchester collapsed. The Pembertons can save everything. Surely you see I had no choice." No choice. As if she'd been a coat he could simply hang back in the wardrobe when a better option presented itself. She dressed mechanically, choosing the plainest gown she owned, a dove-gray day dress that made her look like she was in mourning. Perhaps she was. Not for Julian, she'd realized somewhere around the third sleepless night, but for the version of herself who'd believed in fairy tales. Downstairs, Margaret's drawing room buzzed with feminine voices. Elena recognized them before she entered. The Ashford sisters, perpetually hunting for scandal. Mrs. Whitby, who'd never forgiven Elena's mother for marrying above her station. And of course, Lady Pemberton herself. Elena paused in the doorway. Lady Pemberton sat in the best chair, her daughter Louisa beside her, looking pale and miserable despite her recent engagement. The older woman's eyes flickered to Elena with something that might have been triumph or guilt. With people like her, it was hard to tell the difference. "Ah, Elena, dear," Margaret said, her voice too bright. "Do join us. We were just discussing the upcoming charity auction. Were you?" Elena moved into the room, acutely aware of every gaze tracking her progress. "How charitable of you all." Mrs. Whitby's teacup clattered slightly. "Yes, well, the orphanage fund desperately needs support this year. Perhaps the Pembertons could make a substantial donation," Elena said, settling into the chair farthest from Lady Pemberton, "given their recent good fortune." The silence that followed could have cut glass. Lady Pemberton's smile didn't reach her eyes. "How gracious of you to suggest it, Miss Whitmore. Though I'm sure you understand that marriage alliances are built on more than sentiment. They require practical considerations." "Oh, I understand perfectly." Elena accepted the tea Margaret thrust at her. "Practicality. That's what we're calling it now?" "Elena," Margaret warned. "It's quite all right," Lady Pemberton interrupted, though her knuckles had gone white around her fan. "Miss Whitmore has every right to her feelings, though dwelling on what cannot be changed seems rather self-defeating." Elena took a long sip of tea, buying herself time to swallow the words burning in her throat. Across from her, Louisa Pemberton stared at her lap, her face the color of spoiled milk. "Tell me, Miss Pemberton," Elena said, "are you finding wedding preparations enjoyable?" The girl's head snapped up. Yes, of course." "Of course," Elena echoed. "How could you not? You've captured quite the prize." "That's enough." Lady Pemberton stood abruptly. "Margaret, thank you for the tea. I believe we should take our leave." As they filed out, Louisa paused beside Elena's chair. "I'm sorry," she whispered, so quietly Elena almost missed it. "I didn't want—" "Louisa!" Her mother's voice cracked like a whip. The girl fled. Margaret rounded on Elena the moment the door closed. "What possessed you? Lady Pemberton is one of the most influential women in London." Was I supposed to simper and congratulate them? Elena set down her cup with deliberate care. "Pretend my humiliation never happened?" "I'm trying to help you salvage what's left of your reputation." "My reputation?" Elena laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even herself. "Margaret, my reputation died the moment Julian stood in the Ashford ballroom and announced his engagement to another woman. Nothing I do now can make that worse. You could at least try to appear gracious in defeat." "Is that what you think this is? Defeat?" Elena stood, smoothing her skirts. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I should just accept my place as London's favorite cautionary tale and fade into obscurity. Where are you going?" "Out. I need air that doesn't smell like pity." The rain had stopped, leaving London's streets slick and gray. Elena walked without direction, her half-boots splashing through puddles that would have horrified her a month ago. Funny how quickly standards shifted when you had nothing left to lose. She found herself in Hyde Park, where the morning crowd was thin, mostly servants on errands and the occasional gentleman riding. The Serpentine looked like hammered pewter under the clouded sky. "Miss Whitmore!" She spun. The Duke of Blackthorn stood a few paces away, looking as out of place in the daylight as a nocturnal creature surprised by dawn. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that seemed to catalog everything without judgment. "Your Grace!" She curtsied automatically, then felt foolish for it. What did protocol matter anymore? "You left the ball quite abruptly last night." He moved closer, his hands clasped behind his back. "I wondered if the company had proved too suffocating." "You could say that." Lena studied him. "Though I'm surprised you noticed. I was under the impression you avoided such events." "I do." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Yet somehow I keep finding myself at them, watching humanity perform its various rituals." "And what ritual was I performing?" "Survival." The word landed between them with unexpected weight. "Though I suspect you're growing tired of merely surviving." Elena blinked. No one had put it quite like that before, not even herself. "You presume a great deal based on one evening's observation, Your Grace." "Adrian," he corrected, "and perhaps I do. But I know something about public humiliation and the exhausting work of pretending it doesn't matter." She wanted to ask what he meant, but the shuttered look that crossed his face suggested he wouldn't answer. Instead, she said, "Why are you speaking to me? Surely your reputation can't benefit from association with London's most notorious cast-off." "My reputation is already ruined beyond repair." He said it matter-of-factly, like commenting on the weather. "Has been for years. I find it quite liberating, actually." What could a duke possibly do to ruin his reputation? Adrian's expression hardened. "Refuse to play the game. Withdraw from society. Fail to produce an heir and a spare according to schedule. Choose solitude over strategic alliances." He paused. "Believe that a woman who claimed to love me might be telling the truth, only to discover she was counting my fortune instead of my virtues." Elena's breath caught. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It taught me valuable lessons about the nature of human ambition." He turned to look at the water. "I saw that same ambition in your Mr. Cartwright's face last night, and I saw something else in yours, something I recognized." "What?" "Rage." He said it softly, almost gently, the kind that's still deciding whether to burn outward or inward. Elena should have been offended, should have made some cutting remark and walked away. Instead, she found herself saying, "Both, I think, depending on the day." Adrian nodded as if this made perfect sense. They stood in silence for a moment, watching a pair of swans glide across the Serpentine with enviable indifference to human drama. "I'm leaving London," Adrian said finally, "returning to my estate in Northshire. The countryside is less performative." "Running away?" Elena asked, then winced. "I'm sorry, that was rude." "But accurate." He didn't seem bothered, though I prefer to call it strategic retreat. Sometimes the battlefield itself is the problem. Elena thought about Margaret's drawing room, the endless parade of visitors who came to satisfy their curiosity, the way even servants whispered when she passed. That sounds appealing, actually. Then come with me. She stared at him. I beg your pardon? Not as my duchess, he added quickly, color rising in his cheeks. God, that came out wrong. I mean, there's a village school in Northshire. The previous teacher died last winter and they've been struggling. You could teach. Be useful. Be somewhere that doesn't give a damn about Julian Cartwright or the London season. You're offering me charity. I'm offering you an escape route. Adrian met her gaze steadily. There's a difference. You'd work for your room and board. The children are challenging. The village is remote. The accommodations are nothing like what you're accustomed to, but no one there will care about your broken engagement. They have actual problems. Elena's first instinct was to refuse. It was absurd, running off to the countryside with a man she'd met twice, to teach children in some god-forsaken village. Margaret would be horrified. London society would have fresh scandal to chew on for months. But beneath the absurdity, something else stirred, something that felt dangerously like hope. Why? She asked. Why would you offer this to me? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Because I watched you walk into that ballroom last night with your head high, and I thought, there's someone who understands that survival isn't enough, that sometimes you have to burn down the life that's killing you and build something new from the ashes. That's very poetic for a reclusive duke. I read too much. He almost smiled. So, will you come, or will you stay here and let them slowly suffocate you with their pity? Elena looked back toward the city, where church spires pierced the gray sky like accusations. Somewhere in those streets, Julian was probably planning his wedding. Lady Pemberton was probably already crafting her next social coup. Margaret was probably composing lectures about propriety and second chances. She thought about the empty years stretching ahead, the gradual fade from scandalous to simply sad, from the woman Julian Cartwright jilted to the spinster everyone had forgotten. Or she could choose something else entirely. When do we leave? Elena heard herself say. Adrian's surprise was almost comical. You're serious? Do I look like I'm joking? Elena surprised herself by laughing, a real laugh, not the bitter sound from Margaret's drawing room. You're right. This city is suffocating me. If I stay, I'll become exactly what they expect. A cautionary tale who withered away in respectable obscurity. At least in Northshire, I can fail on my own terms. That's the spirit. Adrian's dry tone made her laugh again. We leave in 3 days. Pack light. The roads are terrible this time of year, and anything too fine will be ruined within a week. 3 days? Elena's stomach flipped. That's barely time to... Second thoughts already? No. She said it firmly, surprising herself with the certainty. No second thoughts, just practical concerns. Practical concerns are for people who've decided to stay trapped. Adrian started walking, and Elena fell into step beside him. You'll need sturdy boots, plain dresses, and the ability to tolerate children who've been running wild for 6 months. Can you manage that? I have no idea. Elena felt a strange lightness in her chest. I've never taught before. I've never lived anywhere but London. I've never done anything particularly useful in my entire life. Perfect. Then you have nothing to lose by trying. They walked the long way around the Serpentine, and Adrian told her about Northshire. The brutal winters, the stubborn villagers, the school that was more aspiration than reality. He painted such a bleak picture that Elena began to wonder if he was deliberately trying to discourage her. You're making it sound awful, she finally said. It is awful. Adrian stopped at the park's edge. The roof leaks. The children are half feral. The nearest decent library is 15 miles away. You'll be cold, uncomfortable, and probably wondering why you ever agreed to this within the first week. Then why do you keep a house there? His expression shifted to something Elena couldn't quite read. Because it's real. The problems are real. The people are real. When someone speaks to you in Northshire, you know exactly what they mean, because they're too tired and too practical for games. He paused. And because it's the only place I've ever felt like I could actually do something that mattered. Elena nodded slowly. She understood that, the need to matter, to be more than ornamental. 3 days, she repeated. I'll be ready. Margaret's reaction was predictably apocalyptic. Have you lost your mind? She paced her drawing room like a caged animal. Running off to the countryside with a duke you barely know? Elena, this is madness. Perhaps, Elena continued, folding her plainest dresses, but it's my madness. People will talk. People are already talking. Elena looked up. Margaret, I'm grateful for your hospitality, truly. But staying here is killing me by inches. Can't you see that? Her cousin's face crumpled. I just wanted to help. I know. Elena crossed the room and took her hands. But I need to help myself. And I can't do that here, surrounded by everything that reminds me of who I thought I'd be. What will I tell people? Elena squeezed her hands gently. Tell them the truth. Tell them I've gone to teach in the countryside. Tell them I've gone mad. Tell them whatever makes you feel better. She released Margaret and returned to her packing. I'll write to you, I promise. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and second-guessing. Elena bought sturdy boots that made her wince at their ugliness. She packed her plainest clothes and left behind everything that screamed London society. She wrote letters she knew she'd probably never send, to her father, explaining without quite apologizing, to Julian, saying nothing important but somehow needing to have the final word. On the morning of departure, she stood in Margaret's foyer with a single trunk and a carpet bag, feeling simultaneously terrified and more alive than she had in months. Last chance to reconsider, Margaret said, her eyes red. I know. Elena hugged her. Thank you for everything, truly. Adrian's carriage arrived precisely at dawn. He helped her load her meager belongings, his face carefully neutral. Still certain? He asked as they pulled away from the townhouse. Elena watched London's streets roll past. The buildings she'd known all her life. The shops where she'd spent countless afternoons. The parks where Julian had courted her with pretty words and prettier lies. I'm terrified, she admitted. But yes, I'm certain. The journey north took 3 days. They stopped at coaching inns where the sheets were questionable and the food was worse. Adrian proved to be surprisingly easy traveling company, quiet when she needed silence, conversational when the monotony grew unbearable. On the second day, as rain drummed against the carriage roof, Elena asked, What happened to her, the woman who betrayed you? Adrian didn't pretend not to understand. She married the man she'd been seeing while we were engaged. A merchant's son with more money than sense. I heard they moved to Bath. Do you ever think about her? Less than I expected to. He gazed out at the sodden countryside. Mostly I think about what an idiot I was for not seeing what was obvious to everyone else. Love makes idiots of us all, apparently. Apparently. He turned to her. Are you still in love with Cartwright? The question should have stung. Instead, Elena found herself actually considering it. No, she said finally. I don't think I ever was, really. I was in love with what he represented. Security, respectability, a future that looked like all the futures I'd been taught to want. She paused. The humiliating part isn't losing him. It's realizing how much of myself I'd already given up trying to be what he needed. Adrian nodded slowly. That's the part that takes longest to forgive. They sat in comfortable silence after that, both lost in thoughts of the people they'd been before their respective betrayals. Northshire appeared on the afternoon of the third day, a collection of stone buildings clustered in a valley that looked like it had been carved out by an angry god and then forgotten. The sky was the color of slate, and a cold wind cut through Elena's traveling cloak like it wasn't there. Charming, she said. Adrian huffed a laugh. Wait until winter properly sets in. This is practically Mediterranean compared to January. The village square was muddy and mostly deserted. A few faces appeared in windows as the carriage passed, curious but not welcoming. Elena felt a flutter of doubt. What was she doing here? She knew nothing about teaching, nothing about village life, nothing about surviving without the cushion of society's conventions. Adrian's estate sat on a hill overlooking the valley, a sprawling stone manor that looked like it had been built to repel invaders and hadn't quite accepted that the war was over. It was imposing rather than beautiful, functional rather than elegant. Home sweet home, Adrian muttered, helping her down. A woman emerged from the main entrance, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, wearing an expression that suggested she'd seen everything twice and hadn't been impressed either time. Mrs. Thornby, Adrian said. This is Miss Whitmore. She'll be staying in the East Wing and taking over the village school. Mrs. Thornby's gaze raked over Elena, cataloging and dismissing in one efficient sweep. School's been closed 6 months, Your Grace. Buildings in poor shape. Children are half wild. I'm aware. Miss Whitmore know what she's getting into? Not remotely, Elena said before Adrian could answer, but I'm here anyway. Something shifted in Mrs. Thornby's expression. Not quite approval, but not outright hostility either. Well, at least you're honest about it. She turned and marched back inside. I'll have Betsy prepare your rooms. Supper's at 7. Don't be late. Elena looked at Adrian. She's formidable. She runs this entire estate with an iron fist and has for 30 years. Adrian grabbed her trunk. If she approves of you, you'll be fine. If she doesn't, he trailed off meaningfully. What happens if she doesn't? I've never seen anyone last long enough to find out. Her rooms in the east wing were Spartan but clean. A bedroom, a small sitting room, and a view of the village below that was either bleak or honest, depending on your mood. Elena unpacked slowly, hanging her plain dresses in the wardrobe and trying not to think about what she'd left behind. At 7 sharp, she made her way to the dining room where Adrian and Mrs. Thornby were already seated at a table that could have accommodated 20, but currently held 3 place settings at one end. We don't stand on ceremony here, Adrian said, gesturing to a chair. Mrs. Thornby eats with me. She says if she has to cook the food, she's damn well going to make sure people appreciate it properly. Mrs. Thornby snorted. What I said was that I'm too old to eat in the kitchen like a servant when there's a perfectly good dining room going to waste. The meal was simple, roast chicken, potatoes, vegetables, but better than anything Elena had eaten at coaching inns. She was ravenous in a way she hadn't been in weeks. So, Mrs. Thornby said, watching Elena eat, why'd you really come here? Elena paused mid-bite. His Grace told you. I heard what he said. I'm asking what actually happened. Adrian made a warning sound. Mrs. Thornby, hooky? Oh, hush. Girl's not made of spun sugar. The older woman's gaze didn't waver. Something drove you out of London. Question is whether you're running from something or toward something. Makes a difference. Elena set down her fork carefully. She could lie. Offer some sanitized version of events that painted her as nobly sacrificing for a greater cause. But something about Mrs. Thornby's directness, about this whole situation, demanded honesty. Both, she said finally. My fiancé married someone wealthier. I became London's favorite scandal. And I realized I'd been performing a role my entire life without ever asking if it was the role I wanted. She met Mrs. Thornby's eyes. So, yes, I'm running. But I'm also hoping that maybe, in a place where no one knows what I'm supposed to be, I might figure out what I actually am. Silence fell over the table. Adrian stared at his plate. Mrs. Thornby studied Elena with an expression that was impossible to read. Then the older woman nodded once, sharply. Good. Honesty's the only thing worth a damn out here. She stood, gathering plates. School opens Monday. Better rest up. Those children will eat you alive if you show weakness. After she'd gone, Adrian said quietly, You didn't have to tell her all that. I know. Elena pushed back from the table. But I meant what I said in the park. I'm done pretending. That night, Elena lay in her unfamiliar bed listening to sounds she'd never heard in London. Wind howling around stone walls, animals calling in the distance, the absolute silence that comes from being miles from anything resembling civilization. She should have been terrified. Should have been already planning her escape back to Margaret's townhouse and the comfortable misery of London society. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt since before Julian's betrayal. Anticipation. Not hope, exactly. She wasn't that naive anymore, but the sense that perhaps, just perhaps, she was finally moving towards something instead of simply away. Monday would bring the children, the school, the reality of what she'd committed to. Monday would test whether this desperate gamble had been courage or just another kind of cowardice. But that was Monday's problem. Tonight, in the darkness of Northshire, Elena Whitmore allowed herself to believe she might be capable of reinvention after all. Monday arrived with the kind of cold that made Elena's bones ache. She stood outside the village school at 7:30, staring at what could generously be called a building. The stone walls leaned slightly to the left, as if the structure itself was exhausted. Several windows were broken, covered with boards that had weathered to the color of ash. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Worse than you expected? Adrian appeared beside her, his breath fogging in the frigid air. I don't know what I expected. Elena pulled her shawl tighter. But this is ambitious. That's one word for it. He pushed open the door, which groaned in protest. Inside smelled of mildew and abandonment. Desks lay scattered like broken teeth, some missing legs, others simply overturned and forgotten. The roof had gaps large enough to see sky through. Bird droppings decorated what remained of the blackboard. Elena's stomach sank. Adrian, this is impossible. Probably. He picks up a broken desk, examining it. But Mrs. Thornby says 12 children used to attend regularly before Mrs. Crawford died. That's 12 children who've gone 6 months without education. 12 children who are probably better off than they would be sitting in this freezing disaster waiting for the roof to collapse on them. Fair point. Adrian set the desk down. Look, I can get men up here to patch the roof and fix the windows. But it'll take time, week at minimum. So what am I supposed to do in the meantime? Improvise? He had the grace to look sheepish. I may have oversold the readiness of this situation. Elena laughed despite herself, a sharp, slightly hysterical sound. You think? A noise from outside cut through her response. Voices, young and deliberately loud. Elena moved to the doorway and saw them. A cluster of children ranging from perhaps 6 to 14, watching the school with expressions that ranged from curious to openly hostile. That's them, Adrian murmured behind her. Your students. They don't look particularly eager for education. Would you be if your last teacher died of pneumonia, probably caught in this very building? Elena stepped outside. The children fell silent, studying her with the unnerving directness of those who'd learned early that adults were either useful or obstacles. The oldest, a lanky boy with dark hair and a permanent sneer, stood at the front like a general surveying enemy territory. You the new teacher? He called out. I am. My name is Miss Whitmore. How long you staying? The question held more weight than its simplicity suggested. Elena could feel the test in it, the expectation that she'd lie or make promises she couldn't keep. I don't know, she answered honestly. But I'm here now. The boy snorted. Last lady said that too, then she died. Thomas, Adrian's voice carried warning. That's enough. It's all right, Elena said quickly. She approached the group, trying to look more confident than she felt. You're right to be skeptical. I'm from London. I've never taught before. This building is a disaster, and frankly, I'm terrified. She paused, meeting Thomas's eyes. But I'm here because I needed to be somewhere that I could actually be useful instead of ornamental. So if you're willing to take a chance on me, I'm willing to take one on you. Silence. A smaller girl with tangled red hair whispered something to her neighbor. Thomas's sneer faltered, then reasserted itself. Building's not safe, he said. Roof's got holes. Floor's rotting through in the back corner. I noticed. Elena looked back at the decrepit structure. His Grace is arranging repairs. Until then, we'll have to find somewhere else. Where? Good question. Elena's mind raced through possibilities, all of them inadequate. Then her gaze landed on Adrian's manor, solid and sprawling on the hillside. The estate, she said before she could reconsider. There must be a room large enough. Adrian's eyebrows rose. The estate? You have what, 30 rooms? Surely one can be spared for education. She turned back to the children. Classes start tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock sharp. Come ready to work. Thomas studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. We'll see. He turned and walked away, the other children following like a small, skeptical army. The estate, Adrian repeated once they were alone. You do realize Mrs. Thornby is going to have opinions about this? Then she can share them. Elena's boldness surprised even herself. You said you wanted to do something that mattered here. 12 children going uneducated matters. His expression shifted to something that might have been respect. The south drawing room is probably your best option. Large windows, good light. Though it hasn't been used in years. Then we'll make it usable. Mrs. Thornby did indeed have opinions, which she delivered that evening over supper with the precision of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of disapproval. Children, in the house, tracking mud and worse through rooms that haven't seen proper use in a decade. She stabbed at her roast beef. His Grace's mother would rise from her grave. His Grace's mother died when I was 7, and would probably be thrilled to see the house serving any purpose beyond housing ghosts, Adrian said mildly. Elena's right. The school building is dangerous, so tear it down and build a new one. That takes months and money I'd prefer to spend on other repairs. He set down his fork. This is temporary, just until the building is safe. Nothing's ever temporary, Mrs. Thornby muttered, but Elena heard resignation beneath the complaint. The next morning, Elena arrived at the south drawing room to find Adrian already there. Furniture pushed against the walls, windows thrown open despite the cold. Dust motes swirled in the weak sunlight like tiny stars. I recruited some stable hands, he said, rolling up his sleeves. We can bring in tables from storage. Arrange them however you need. They worked in silence for a while, the physical labor oddly comforting. Elena found herself remembering Margaret's drawing room, the careful arrangement of furniture designed to display status, every object positioned for maximum effect. This was different. This was building something, however imperfect. The children arrived in clusters. First the young ones, shepherded by an older girl Adrian quietly identified as Emma Crawford, the previous teacher's daughter. Then the middle group, wary but curious. Finally Thomas, deliberately late, flanked by 2 other boys who looked like they were ready for a fight rather than a lesson. Sit anywhere, Elena said, trying to project authority she didn't feel. We'll sort out permanent arrangements later. They settled with the chaos of water finding its level, the young ones up front, the older ones claiming the back tables like territory. Thomas took the corner farthest from Elena, arms crossed, expression broadcasting boredom. Elena stood at the front, acutely aware that she had no lesson plan, no experience, and no idea what she was doing. 12 faces watched her with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. So, she began. Who can read? Half the hands went up. Thomas's stayed firmly crossed over his chest. Who wants to learn? More hands. Even Thomas shifted slightly, though he still didn't raise his hand. Good. Because that's what we're going to focus on first. Reading opens everything else. Mathematics, history, geography, all of it. She moved to the makeshift blackboard Adrian had set up. Really just a board painted black, but it would do. Let's start with something practical. How many of you help your parents with work? All the hands went up this time. What kind of work? Father's a blacksmith, one boy called out. I help with the forge. My mum sells eggs, said the red-haired girl. I count the money. I help with sheep, Emma said quietly. We've got 37 this year. Elena seized on this. Excellent. So you all already use mathematics every day, counting, measuring, figuring costs and profits. She wrote numbers on the board. Let's talk about how reading and writing help you do those things better. Thomas, your family farms, correct? He glared at her. So? So how do you track what you've planted, what's sold, what you're owed? Pa does it. How? Silence. Then grudgingly, in his head mostly, sometimes scratches it on paper. And if something happens to your father, if he gets sick or injured, Elena kept her voice neutral. Does anyone else in the family know what's owed, what's planted, what needs doing? Thomas's jaw tightened. She'd hit something raw, but she pressed forward. That's what literacy gives you, security, independence, the ability to manage your own affairs instead of depending on others to do it for you. Something flickered in his expression, not acceptance, but at least consideration. The morning proceeded in fits and starts. The younger children were eager but easily distracted. The older ones participated reluctantly, waiting for her to fail some test she couldn't quite identify. By noon, Elena's voice was hoarse and her head pounded. Tomorrow, same time, she said as they filed out, and I expect everyone to bring paper and something to write with, even if it's just charcoal. Thomas paused at the door. You actually know this stuff, or are you just making it up? Bit of both, Elena admitted, but I can read and write and do mathematics, and I'm willing to share what I know. Whether you're willing to learn it is up to you. He grunted and left. Adrian appeared in the doorway moments later. How was it? Exhausting, terrifying, possibly completely useless. Elena sank into a chair. But they came. All 12 of them. That's something. He handed her a cup of tea that appeared from nowhere. Mrs. Thornby sent this. I think she's softening toward you, or poisoning me slowly. She'd be more efficient about it. The pattern established itself over the next 2 weeks. Morning lessons in the drawing room, afternoons spent planning and gathering materials. Elena scavenged books from Adrian's library, adapting lessons on the fly when her students proved wildly different in ability and interest. She learned that Emma was brilliant at mathematics but couldn't read beyond basic words. That Thomas was actually quite bright when he forgot to maintain his hostile facade. That the youngest, a 6-year-old named Peter, had a memory like a trap and could recite anything he heard once. She also learned that teaching was harder than anything she'd ever attempted. The children tested her constantly, disrupting lessons, forgetting assignments, engaging in small wars with each other that she had to navigate without formal authority. Thomas remained her biggest challenge, brilliant but angry in ways she didn't understand. His father drinks, Adrian told her one evening after she'd complained about the boy's attitude. Has since Thomas's mother died 3 years ago. The farm's barely surviving. Thomas does most of the real work. He's 14. Out here, that's nearly grown. Elena thought about that, about Thomas shouldering adult responsibilities while still being treated like a child, about the anger that came from having no control over your circumstances. She knew something about that now. The next day, she pulled Thomas aside after lessons. I need help. He looked suspicious. With what? The older students are advancing faster than the younger ones. I can't teach both groups effectively at the same time. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I need someone who can work with the younger students on basic reading while I focus on the advanced group. Someone patient and smart enough to break things down simply. Why me?
Virus.
Because you understand the work better than you pretend to. And because Peter follows you around like a puppy, he'd actually listen to you. Thomas stared at her, clearly trying to identify the trap. What's in it for me? Advanced mathematics, history, geography beyond the valley, and she hesitated, then committed. I'll teach you accounting, proper bookkeeping for your father's farm. His expression shifted. Pa wouldn't. Your father doesn't need to know. You can keep the books yourself. That way when the harvest comes or the tax collector arrives, you know exactly where you stand. She met his eyes. Knowledge is power, Thomas. I'm offering you power over your own situation. He was quiet for a long moment. You really think I can do this? Teach the little ones? I think you're probably the smartest person in this room besides me, and I'm barely qualified myself. Elena smiled. So yes, I think you can. Fine. He tried to sound grudging, but Elena caught the flash of something else. Pride, maybe, or hope. But I want real accounting, not simple stuff. Deal. The arrangement worked better than Elena had dared hope. Thomas proved surprisingly good with the younger children, breaking down concepts into terms they understood, never losing patience, even when Peter asked the same question 5 times. It freed Elena to push the older students harder, and the whole dynamic shifted from her versus them to something closer to collaboration. 3 weeks in, Emma approached her after class. Miss Whitmore, could you teach me to read better? Proper reading, I mean. Not just words, but whole books. Of course, why? The girl's face colored. Ma used to read to me before she died. Stories from her books. I want to read them myself, but they're too hard still. Elena's throat tightened. Bring one tomorrow. We'll work on it together. I can't pay. I don't want payment. Knowledge isn't something you hoard, Emma. It's something you share. That evening, Adrian found Elena in his library, surrounded by books she'd pulled for Emma. You look happy, he observed. Elena glanced up, surprised. Do I? First time I've seen you smile like that. Real smile, not the defensive one you wear when you're trying to prove something. She set down the book in her lap. Emma wants to read her mother's stories. Thomas is teaching himself accounting using ledgers I stole from your study. Borrowed. And today, Peter correctly identified Africa on a map without prompting. She laughed. It's not much, but it feels like something's actually happening. It is. Adrian settled into the chair opposite her. The village is noticing. Parents are commenting on children knowing things, being able to help more effectively. Some of them probably hate it. Education means questions, and questions threaten stability. Let them hate it. Adrian's voice held an edge she rarely heard. Ignorance serves the people in power, not the people doing the work. You're disrupting that. It's uncomfortable but necessary. Elena studied him. You've thought about this a lot. I've had time to think about many things. He stood, moving to the window. My father believed education was dangerous for the lower classes, said it gave them ideas above their station, made them dissatisfied with their lot. He spent his life maintaining systems that kept people exactly where they were born. And you disagree. I watched those systems crush people whose only crime was being born in the wrong circumstances. Adrian's reflection in the window looked haunted, including someone I cared about. Elena wanted to ask who, but the shuttered look on his face suggested she wouldn't get an answer. Instead, she said, "Is that why you invited me here? To disrupt things?" "I invited you because you looked like someone who needed disrupting." He turned back to face her. "And because I thought you might be brave enough to help me burn down the structures my father spent his life building." That's quite a lot to put on teaching children to read. Is it? Adrian's smile was thin. Every revolution starts with someone learning to question what they've been told is inevitable. Before Elena could respond, shouting erupted from somewhere outside. They exchanged glances and rushed to the window. In the distance, orange light flickered against the darkening sky. Fire, and not small. "That's the village," Adrian said, already moving toward the door. They ran, Elena gathering her skirts, Adrian pulling ahead, both of them slipping on the muddy path down the hillside. Other people emerged from the manor, drawn by the commotion. The smell hit Elena before they reached the square. Smoke, thick and acrid, carrying the scent of burning wood, and something else she couldn't identify. The schoolhouse was engulfed in flames. Not the careful burn of a controlled fire, but a roaring inferno that turned night into day and sent sparks spiraling into the sky like malevolent stars. Villagers had formed a bucket line from the well, but it was clearly hopeless. The building that had stood for 40 years was dying, taking with it whatever slim hope of quick repair had remained. "Everyone back!" someone shouted. "Roof's going to collapse." As if on cue, the structure groaned, a sound like a dying animal, and the roof caved inward with a shower of sparks and a wave of heat that sent the crowd stumbling backward. Elena felt Adrian's hand on her arm, steadying her. "Was anyone inside?" she managed to ask. "No." Thomas appeared beside them, his face illuminated by the fire. It was empty, locked up like it's been all month. "Then how—" Elena started, but the answer crystallized even as she spoke. The building had been abandoned, vulnerable, and someone had taken advantage. Who would do this? Adrian's voice was low, dangerous. "Could have been an accident," an older man suggested weakly. "Lightning, maybe." "There's been no storm." Thomas's jaw was set. "And I saw someone running from the square earlier. Couldn't make out who, but they were definitely running, not walking." The fire burned itself out over the next hour, leaving behind a skeleton of blackened stone and collapsed timber. The crowd dispersed slowly, talking in low voices about accidents and misfortune and bad luck. Elena stood staring at the ruins until Adrian finally tugged her away. "Come on, nothing more to see tonight." "That was our school," she said numbly. "That was a building. The school is what you've been doing up at the manor." He paused. "Though whoever did this probably disagrees with that assessment." Back at the estate, Mrs. Thornby had hot tea waiting and the good sense not to ask questions. Elena sat in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup she couldn't seem to warm herself with, while Adrian paced. "Someone burned it deliberately," he said finally. "The question is who and why." "Because they don't want the children educated," Elena said. "You said it yourself. Questions threaten stability. Someone's stability is being threatened. Or someone thinks you don't belong here and this is their way of sending a message." Elena looked up at him. "You think this was about me? I think you arrived from London, immediately took over the school, moved classes to my estate, and started teaching things that challenge how people here have always done things." Adrian stopped pacing. "Change makes people nervous. Nervous people do stupid things. So what do? We keep going." Adrian's expression hardened. "We keep teaching. We keep pushing. We prove that burning a building doesn't burn down an idea. That's very noble, but nothing." He sat across from her. "You asked me once why I stay in Northshire. This is why. Because the moment you let fear dictate your actions, you've already lost." Elena wanted to argue, to point out the very real danger, to suggest maybe retreat wasn't the same as surrender. But looking at Adrian's face, at the determination mixed with something raw, she understood. This wasn't about the school anymore. It was about drawing a line and refusing to be pushed back behind it. Fine, she heard herself say. We keep going, but we need to be smarter about it, more careful. Agreed. Adrian stood. I'll post men around the estate at night, and we'll start walking the children home after lessons. Make sure they're safe. The next morning, the students arrived as usual, though their faces were somber and Thomas looked like he hadn't slept. Elena met them in the south drawing room, which suddenly felt less like a temporary solution and more like a statement. I assume you all heard about the fire, she began. No point pretending otherwise. The school building is gone, but the school itself, what we're doing here, continues. Unless anyone wants to quit? No one moved. Even Thomas held his ground. Good, because whoever burned that building thinks education is something you can destroy with fire. Elena kept her voice steady. They're wrong. What you learn stays with you no matter what burns around you, so let's prove them wrong. She taught that day with fierce determination, pushing harder than usual, refusing to let fear or uncertainty show. The students responded in kind, working with an intensity that bordered on defiance. They were all in on it now, whatever it was, bound together by someone else's attempt to stop them. At lunch, Thomas pulled her aside. I know who did it. Elena's heart stuttered. What? The fire. I know who said it. His face was tight with anger. Robert Thorne. His father owns half the farmland around here, employs most of the village. He's been telling people that education makes workers lazy, gives them ideas about wages and conditions. Can you prove it? I saw him. Thomas's hands clenched. Near the school just before sunset. He didn't see me, but I saw him clear enough. We need to tell Adrian. Already did. He's gone to confront Thorne now. Thomas met her eyes. Miss Whitmore, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Thorne doesn't just hate the school. He hates that you're here changing things. And he's got enough power in this village to make life very difficult for anyone who stands against him. Elena felt ice settle in her stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to decide how far you're willing to go with this, because Thorne won't stop at burning an empty building next time. The weight of that settled over her, the responsibility she'd taken on without fully understanding its implications. She'd come to Northshire running from humiliation, thinking teaching would be simple moral work. But nothing was simple here. Every choice had consequences that rippled outward, affecting people whose lives were already precarious. She thought about Julian, about how he'd chosen safety over integrity when the stakes got high, how she'd judged him for it while never having to make that choice herself. Now the choice was hers. We keep going, she said, echoing Adrian's words from the night before. We keep teaching, and we prepare for whatever comes next. Thomas nodded slowly. You're braver than I thought. I'm terrified, Elena corrected, but I'm here and I'm not leaving. Adrian returned that evening looking grim. Thorne denies everything, of course, says he was home all evening, has his whole family backing the alibi. He poured himself whiskey, a first in Elena's observation. He also made it very clear that he considers the school a disruption and would prefer it cease operations. Or what? He didn't specify, didn't need to. Adrian drained the glass. He owns enough land and employs enough people that he can make life difficult for anyone associated with us. Parents might pull their children out of fear. Workers might find themselves suddenly unemployed. So we've accomplished nothing but making things worse. No. Adrian set down the glass with deliberate care. We've exposed the real problem. It was never about the building. It's about power, about control, about keeping things exactly as they've always been, because that serves the people at the top. He looked at her directly. The question is whether you're willing to fight that fight, because it won't be easy and it won't be safe, and there's no guarantee we'll win. Elena thought about London, about the safe path she could have chosen, accepting her humiliation, fading into respectable obscurity, living a small, careful life that threatened no one. She thought about the children this morning, their faces set with determination that matched her own. She thought about Thomas learning accounting, not because it was easy, but because it gave him control over his future. About Emma reading her mother's books. About Peter seeing Africa on a map and understanding the world was bigger than the valley that hemmed him in. "I'm willing," she said, "but we need to be strategic. Thorne has power, but we have something too." "What's that?" Elena smiled, feeling something fierce and unfamiliar uncurl in her chest. "We have 12 children who are learning to think for themselves, and eventually they'll grow up. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it happens." Adrian's expression shifted to something that looked like admiration. "You've changed since London." "No," Elena corrected. "I'm just finally becoming who I should have been all along." Outside, the sky darkened toward night. Somewhere in the village, Robert Thorne was probably congratulating himself on striking a blow against disruption. He'd burned a building and thought he'd won. He had no idea the war had just begun. The war came quietly at first, disguised as coincidence. 2 days after the fire, Emma Crawford didn't show up for lessons. Elena waited until mid-morning before walking to the Crawford cottage on the village outskirts, a sagging structure that looked like it was held together by stubbornness and prayer. Emma's older brother answered the door, his face closed off. "She's needed at home," he said flatly. "For how long?" "Indefinitely." He started to close the door, then paused. "Look, Miss Whitmore, it's nothing personal, but Father Thorne made it clear that families who keep sending children to your lessons might find their leases suddenly up for review. We rent this land from him. We can't afford to lose it." "Robert Thorne doesn't own you. He owns the ground under our feet. Same thing." The door shut with finality. Elena stood there, rage and helplessness warring in her chest. By afternoon, 3 more families had pulled their children out. Always the same story. Rent concerns, work obligations, nothing personal. By week's end, her class of 12 had shrunk to 7. "He's picking off the vulnerable ones," Adrian said that evening, pacing the library like a caged animal. "The families with the most to lose. What can we do?" Elena watched the remaining students through the window, Thomas drilling Peter on multiplication tables with a patience that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. "We can't force parents to risk their homes." "No, but we can make staying more appealing than leaving." Adrian stopped pacing. "What if we paid them?" Elena turned. "Paid who?" "The families. A small stipend for each child who attends. Not charity. Compensation for the work time they're sacrificing by sending their children to learn instead of labor." "That's insane. You'd be paying people to do what benefits them." "I'd be evening the scales." "Thorne's using economic pressure to force compliance. We counter with economic incentive." Adrian's eyes gleamed with something reckless. "Besides, what good is my money if I can't use it to irritate men like him?" Elena wanted to argue about pride, about sustainability, about what happened when Adrian's funds eventually ran out. But watching Thomas teach Peter, seeing how the boy's face lit up with understanding, she found she didn't care about the long-term economics. "How much?" she asked. "Enough to matter. 2 shillings per child per week." "That's absurd." "That's the point." Adrian moved to his desk, already pulling out paper. "I'll send word tomorrow. Any family who keeps their children in lessons receives compensation. And before you object again, remember that every child who learns to read and calculate becomes someone who can't be easily cheated or controlled. That's worth far more than 2 shillings. The announcement caused exactly the chaos Elena expected. By the following Monday, all 12 children were back, plus 4 new ones whose parents suddenly discovered enthusiasm for education. Robert Thorne, according to village gossip, had nearly stroked when he heard. "You're buying loyalty," Mrs. Thornby observed over breakfast, her tone impossible to read. "I'm removing obstacles to education," Adrian corrected. "You're starting a war you might not win. Then we'll lose spectacularly." He met her gaze. "Better than not fighting at all." The older woman studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Your father would have hated this." "I know. It's one of the reasons I'm doing it." With 16 students crammed into the south drawing room, Elena had to completely restructure her approach. She divided them into 3 groups: beginners, intermediate, and advanced, rotating her attention while Thomas and Emma, who'd quickly become her informal assistants, handled the others. It was chaos, but productive chaos. The kind that felt like building something instead of just surviving. But Thorne wasn't finished. 3 weeks into the new arrangement, Elena answered a knock at the estate's front door to find a thin man in a clerk's clothes holding official-looking papers. "Miss Elena Whitmore?" "Yes?" Educational Inspector Morrison, assigned by the Regional Education Board. He peered past her into the foyer. I'm here to evaluate your teaching facility and qualifications. Elena's stomach dropped. I wasn't aware we were being evaluated. Routine inspection. Though I understand there have been complaints about unlicensed instruction and inappropriate use of a private residence for public education. Morrison's smile was professionally bland. If you'll show me to your classroom? Adrian appeared at her shoulder. Inspector Morrison, I don't recall authorizing any inspection. The Education Board doesn't require your authorization, Your Grace. Public interest in proper instruction overrides private property concerns. Morrison consulted his papers. According to my records, Miss Whitmore holds no teaching credentials, has received no formal pedagogical training, and is operating an educational facility in a private home without proper licensing. Any of these alone could warrant immediate closure. This is Thorne's doing, Adrian said flatly. Morrison's expression didn't change. I wouldn't know about that, Your Grace. I simply enforce educational standards. He looked at Elena. The classroom, Miss Whitmore? She led him to the south drawing room where her students were working, Thomas helping younger children with reading while Emma demonstrated mathematics on the makeshift blackboard. Morrison watched for exactly 4 minutes before making notes with sharp, decisive movements. No proper desks. Insufficient lighting, inadequate heating, no segregation by age or ability level. Unlicensed instructor with no documented curriculum. He clicked his tongue. I'm afraid this operation fails to meet even minimum standards for educational facilities. These children were receiving no education at all before Miss Whitmore arrived, Adrian said, his voice dangerous. That's not my concern. My concern is ensuring any education provided meets appropriate standards. Morrison produced a printed form. I'm issuing an immediate cessation order. All instructional activities must halt until proper licensing is obtained and facilities meet regional requirements. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her. How long does licensing take? 4 to 6 months, typically, assuming the applicant qualifies, which, given your lack of credentials, seems unlikely. Morrison handed her the form. You have until week's end to close operations. Any instruction after that point will result in fines and potential legal action. He left with the same professional blandness he'd arrived with. Elena stared at the paper in her hands, the official seal mocking her with its authority. He can't do this, she said, but even she heard the uncertainty in her voice. He already has. Adrian took the form, scanning it. Thorne must have gone straight to the regional board, probably made substantial donations to ensure cooperation. The students had stopped working, watching them with expressions that ranged from confused to devastated. Thomas's face was carved from stone. So that's it? He asked. We just stop? No, Elena said automatically, then realized she had no idea what came next. We'll figure something out. How? You heard him. It's illegal now. Since when do you care about legal? Adrian's question carried an edge. Half this village operates outside the law on a daily basis. Thorne certainly does. That's different, Thomas shot back. Those are crimes that hurt people. This is just... He stopped, struggling for words. We were learning things, real things, things that mattered, and they're taking it away because someone with money decided we shouldn't have it. The unfairness of it crashed over Elena. These children had finally started believing education could change their circumstances, and now that belief was being ripped away by paperwork and bureaucracy designed to maintain exactly the systems that oppressed them. I won't stop teaching, she said quietly. Adrian turned to her. Elena, I won't. She looked at her students, at Thomas's barely contained fury, at Peter's uncomprehending hurt, at Emma trying not to cry. Inspector Morrison says I can't run an educational facility. Fine. Then this isn't a facility? It's tutoring, private instruction in a private home. That's semantics. That's a loophole. Elena's mind raced. He can shut down a school, but he can't prevent a tutor from offering private lessons, especially not in your own home. Adrian's expression shifted from concern to something like admiration. You're suggesting we continue but call it something else. I'm suggesting we do exactly what we've been doing, but structure it differently. Private tutoring doesn't require licensing, it doesn't have facility standards, and it's perfectly legal. She turned to the students. Same lessons, same time, same place, just not officially a school. Thorne will find another way to stop you, Thomas said, but hope had crept into his voice. Probably, but we'll deal with that when it happens. Elena smoothed the cessation order flat on the table. In the meantime, lessons resume tomorrow. Anyone who wants to learn is welcome. They came the next day, all 16 of them, plus 2 more whose parents had heard about the defiance and wanted in on it. The lessons continued, unofficial and technically legal, existing in the gray space between rule and regulation. For 2 weeks, it worked. Then Robert Thorne escalated. Elena was walking back from the village. She'd taken to visiting families directly, encouraging attendance, building relationships, when 3 men stepped out from behind the smithy. She recognized one as Thorne's foreman, a thick-necked man named Garrett, who'd glared at her in church. "Miss Whitmore." Garrett's tone was conversational, but his positioning blocked her path. "Heard you're still teaching despite being ordered to stop. Private tutoring isn't illegal." Elena kept her voice steady despite her accelerating heartbeat. "No, but trespassing is, and you're on Mr. Thorne's land right now." He gestured broadly. "All this, the road, the smithy, half the village, belongs to him, and he doesn't want you here anymore." "The road is public." "Not anymore, it isn't. Mr. Thorne's made it private, which means you're trespassing." Garrett stepped closer. "Now, we could make this unpleasant. Call the magistrate, have you arrested, make a whole scene, or you could just agree to stop poisoning children's minds with ideas above their station and leave peacefully." The other 2 men had spread out, flanking her. Elena's mind raced through options. None good. She could run, but where? She could scream, but who would come? She could stand her ground, but against 3 men, that was suicide. "I'm teaching children to read," she said, fighting to keep her voice from shaking. "How is that poisonous? You're teaching them discontent, teaching them to question their betters, teaching them they deserve more than what they've got." Garrett's smile was ugly. "That's poison, where I come from. Move aside." Adrian's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stood at the end of the alley, and he wasn't alone. 6 men from his estate flanked him, workers and stable hands who looked ready for violence. Garrett's confidence faltered. "Your Grace, this is a private matter. This is attempted assault on my property. Miss Whitmore is under my protection." Adrian moved forward, his men following. "Touch her and find out what I do to people who threaten those I care about." The casual way he said it, "those I care about," sent something warm and complicated through Elena's chest. But she pushed it aside, focused on the immediate danger. Garrett and his men backed down, muttering about misunderstandings and just following orders. Once they'd gone, Adrian's carefully controlled expression cracked. "Are you hurt?" "No, scared but not hurt." Elena tried for a smile and managed something wobbly. "Thank you." "Thomas saw them follow you. He ran to get me." Adrian's hands were shaking slightly. "Elena, this is getting dangerous. Thorne's not just trying to shut down the school anymore. He's willing to hurt you personally." "I know." Her legs felt suddenly unsteady. "But what's the alternative? Stop? Let him win? Maybe winning isn't worth getting killed over. And maybe some things are worth more than safety." Elena met his eyes. "You said that yourself, remember? About drawing lines? That was before someone threatened you." The concern in his voice, the fear beneath the anger, Elena felt something shift between them. This wasn't just about the school anymore. When had it become personal? When had she started caring what Adrian thought, how he looked at her, whether his hands shook when he was afraid for her? "I'm not stopping," she said quietly, "but I'll be more careful, I promise." Adrian looked like he wanted to argue further, but footsteps interrupted, Thomas sprinting toward them, his face white with panic. "Miss Whitmore! The estate! There's smoke!" They ran. Elena's skirts tangled her legs, her lungs burned, but she kept pace with Adrian as they crested the hill. The manor rose before them, and everything was wrong. Smoke poured from the east wing, her wing, thick and black against the afternoon sky. "The drawing room," Adrian gasped. "The lessons." But the students had already escaped, clustered on the front lawn looking shocked and soot-stained but alive. Mrs. Thornby stood among them, her face grim as she organized bucket lines. "Everyone's out," she called when she saw Adrian. "Fire's contained to the south drawing room and your private quarters, Miss Whitmore. We're holding it, but barely." Elena stared at the smoke. Her room, her possessions, Not that she had many, but the few she'd brought from London, the letters she'd written but never sent. Gone or going? And the drawing room where they'd taught, where she'd watched children transform from suspicious strangers to eager learners, destroyed. He's escalating, Adrian said, his voice hollow. First the village school, now this. You can't prove it was Thorne, Mrs. Thornby said, but she sounded like she was trying to convince herself. Who else? Thomas's fists clenched. He's done making subtle threats. This is a message. Stop, or it gets worse. The fire took 3 hours to fully extinguish. When the smoke cleared, the damage was devastating. The south drawing room was gutted. Blackened walls, collapsed ceiling, all their makeshift classroom supplies reduced to ash. Elena's quarters were worse. She walked through the charred remains of her room, recognizing nothing. Even the floorboards had burned through in places. It started in multiple locations, Adrian's groundskeeper reported. Definitely arson. Someone set it deliberately. Anyone see anything? Adrian asked. Nothing useful. Whoever did it knew the estate's blind spots. The groundskeeper gestured toward the east wing. They came in through the servants' entrance, set the fires, left the same way. Professional work. Elena sat on what remained of her bed frame, overwhelmed by exhaustion and fury. Everything she'd built here, the trust with the students, the fragile community they'd formed, the sense that she was finally doing something meaningful, burned away in an afternoon. That's it then, she said dully. He wins. No classroom, no supplies, no place to even sleep. We're done. Like hell we are. Thomas stood in the doorway, still covered in soot. You think I spent weeks learning proper accounting just to go back to watching my father drink away our future? You think Peter's going back to not knowing where Africa is? His voice broke slightly. You don't get to quit on us now. Thomas, no. You told me knowledge is power. You told me education means I get control over my life instead of just surviving what happens to me. He stepped into the ruined room. Was that true, or were you just saying things? Elena looked at this boy, this angry, brilliant 14-year-old who'd shouldered adult responsibilities since childhood and was still fighting for the chance to learn, and felt something crack open in her chest. It was true, she said quietly. Then prove it. Thomas held out his hand. Get up. Figure out what's next. Show me that believing in this wasn't another stupid mistake. Elena took his hand and let him pull her upright. Adrian watched from the hallway, his expression complicated. We need a new space, she said, her mind already racing ahead. Somewhere Thorne can't burn down. Somewhere visible enough that attacking it would force him to show his hand publicly. Where? Adrian asked. Elena thought about the village, about the systems of power that kept people trapped, about visibility as protection. Then it hit her. The church, she said. St. Michael's. It's the only building Thorne doesn't own, and burning a church would be too obvious even for him. Father Benedict will never allow it. Mrs. Thornby had appeared behind Adrian. He's conservative, traditional, and terrified of rocking any boats. Then we'll have to convince him. Elena looked at the destruction around her, at the students still clustered on the lawn, at Adrian's determined face, and Thomas's desperate hope. Or we go anyway, and dare him to throw us out in front of the entire congregation. Adrian laughed, a sharp, slightly unhinged sound. You've changed. No, Elena corrected. I'm just done pretending caution will keep us safe. Caution didn't stop the fires, but following rules didn't prevent the threats. Being reasonable didn't make Robert Thorne reasonable in return. She straightened her spine. So we stop playing by their rules and start making our own. That could backfire catastrophically, Mrs. Thornby warned. Probably. Elena felt something wild and reckless rising in her chest, the same feeling she'd had standing in that London ballroom, deciding to walk through judgment with her head high. But at least we'll have tried. Father Benedict was, as predicted, horrified by the proposal. Elena found him in the church rectory the next morning, a thin man with nervous hands who looked like he'd spent his life avoiding conflict. Absolutely not, he said before she'd finished explaining. The church is sacred space, not a schoolhouse. It would be inappropriate, disrespectful. Children learning to read scripture would be disrespectful, Elena interrupted. Teaching them mathematics so they can't be cheated would dishonor your faith. Helping them understand the world beyond this valley somehow violates sacred principles? That's not what I... Father Benedict stammered. It's complicated. Mr. Thorne contributes significantly to church maintenance. If I anger him, you're more afraid of Thorne than of failing the children in your own congregation. Elena's voice was flat. That's what you're saying. The priest's face reddened. You don't understand the position I'm in. I understand perfectly. You're in the same position as everyone else Thorne controls, afraid to act because the consequences might be uncomfortable. Elena stood. Fine. We'll meet outside then, in the churchyard, in front of everyone on Sunday morning. And when people ask why we're not inside where it's warm and dry, I'll tell them their priest values Robert Thorne's money more than their children's futures. You wouldn't... Watch me. Elena headed for the door, then paused. Or you could do the right thing. Allow us to use the church during weekday afternoons when it sits empty anyway. Stand up to one wealthy man on behalf of dozens of struggling families. Actually live the principles you preach on Sundays. She left him sputtering protests. Adrian was waiting outside, leaning against the stone wall with studied casualness that didn't hide his tension. How'd it go? Terribly. He's too scared of Thorne to help. Elena felt bitter satisfaction. So we're teaching in the churchyard starting Monday, publicly, visibly, where everyone can see. Elena, if it rains, then we get wet. She started walking back toward the manor. I'm done hiding, done trying to be reasonable with people who respond to reason with fire. If we're going to fight this, we fight it in the open where Thorne can't pretend he's anything but a bully crushing children's opportunities because it threatens his control. Adrian caught up to her. You know this could end badly. Everything ends badly eventually. Elena didn't slow down. At least this way we'll have fought for something that mattered. Sunday came cold and bright. Elena stood in the churchyard with her remaining students, 13 now, after 3 families had quietly withdrawn when they heard about the latest fire. She'd salvaged what books she could from Adrian's library, borrowed slates and chalk, set up makeshift seats on stone benches that ringed the yard. The congregation filed past them into church, some curious, most carefully neutral. Robert Thorne arrived last, his expression when he saw them sharp enough to draw blood. He stopped. Miss Whitmore. Still defying orders, I see. I'm providing private tutoring in a public space, completely legal. Elena kept her voice level. Is there a problem? There will be if you continue this foolishness. Thorne moved closer, dropping his voice so only she could hear. I've been patient, tried subtle approaches, but you don't seem to understand subtlety, so let me be clear. Shut this down, leave Northshire, and nothing else happens. Continue, and I'll destroy not just your little school, but anyone who supports it, including His Grace. Are you threatening a duke? I'm explaining reality to a woman too stubborn to see it. Thorne's smile was cold. Dukes can be ruined just like anyone else. Scandal, debt, investigations into estate management, there are many tools available to those who know how to use them. And I know people in London who'd be very interested in your past, Miss Whitmore. The jilted woman who fled scandal. I wonder what they'd make of you corrupting children here after failing so completely there. Elena's blood turned to ice, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. Do what you need to do. We're not stopping. Then you've chosen consequences. Thorne straightened. Don't say you weren't warned. He walked into the church, leaving Elena shaking with rage and fear. Adrian appeared at her elbow. What did he say? Threats. Promises to ruin you along with me if we don't stop. She turned to him. Adrian, maybe you should distance yourself from this. He could actually damage your position, your estate. Let him try. Adrian's voice was steel. I'm not abandoning you because some petty tyrant makes threats. This isn't your fight. It absolutely is my fight. Adrian caught her hand, an impulsive gesture that surprised them both. Elena, you came here broken and humiliated and decided to use that pain to help others instead of let it destroy you. You've challenged systems I've hated my entire life, but been too cowardly to confront. If you think I'm walking away from that, from you, because Robert Thorne blusters about consequences, you haven't been paying attention. Elena stared at him, at the fierce determination in his face, at the way his hand felt warm and solid around hers. When had this stopped being about the school? When had she started caring more about Adrian's respect than London's approval? We're probably going to lose, she said quietly. Probably. Adrian smiled slightly, but not without fighting, and not without making him work for it. The lessons that Sunday were strange, conducted in biting wind, with congregation members casting glances through church windows, every word visible in public. But the students came, they worked, and slowly, carefully, other villagers began to stop, to watch, to listen. Elena saw it happen. The moment some of them realized what was being taught wasn't dangerous or subversive, just practical. Reading, mathematics, geography. Things their children might need, things that could help. By the time church let out, a small crowd had gathered. Father Benedict emerged looking uncomfortable, but before he could speak, one of the mothers stepped forward. My daughter says you taught her to figure cost per pound so she doesn't get cheated at market. Elena nodded. Basic mathematics. Useful for anyone who buys or sells. Could you teach my son? The woman asked. He works with me selling produce. It'd help. Of course. Another parent moved forward. Then another. By the time the crowd dispersed, Elena had promises of 5 new students, children whose parents had been watching from the edges, waiting to see if education was truly dangerous or just different. Thorne watched this happen with an expression of pure fury. As he climbed into his carriage, he looked directly at Elena and drew one finger across his throat in a gesture that needed no interpretation. That night, Adrian doubled the guards around the estate. Elena couldn't sleep, every sound making her flinch, waiting for the next attack. It came at dawn, not fire this time, but words. Someone had papered the village with notices during the night. Crude printed sheets that detailed Elena's scandal in London, painting her as a failed woman who'd fled disgrace to corrupt innocent children. They twisted Julian's betrayal into her fault, made her presence in Northshire sound predatory and suspicious. The notices didn't bear Thorne's name, but his fingerprints were all over them. Elena stood in the square, staring at her humiliation made public again, this time not whispered in drawing rooms, but shouted from every wall and post. Parents who'd promised to send their children now looked away when she passed. Father Benedict refused to meet her eyes. He's destroying your reputation, Adrian said quietly beside her, making you toxic to associate with. Then he's already won. Elena felt hollowed out. No parent will send their children to learn from a scandalous woman. Some will. Thomas appeared, holding one of the notices. The ones who care more about their kids learning than about London gossip. The ones who've been watching you actually teach instead of listening to rumors. He crumpled the paper. This is what he does when he's desperate. Tries to make you something you're not because he can't attack what you actually are. And what am I actually? Someone who gives a damn. Thomas met her eyes. That's more than most people. It's enough. But that afternoon, only 8 students came to lessons. By Wednesday, it was 6. The notices had worked. Elena was officially the woman Robert Thorne's propaganda claimed. Dangerous, scandalous, unfit to influence children. She taught those 6 with everything she had, pouring her fury and heartbreak into making sure they learned, they understood, they knew someone believed in them. But inside, she felt the familiar weight of defeat settling in. That evening, Mrs. Thornby found her in the library, surrounded by books she could no longer effectively use. I was wrong about you, the older woman said without preamble. Elena looked up, surprised. What? When you arrived, I thought you were running away. Rich girl playing at purpose because real life got hard. Mrs. Thornby sat across from her. But you're not running anymore. You're standing, even when it costs you everything, even when smart people would quit. I'm losing. Maybe. But you're losing while fighting, not while hiding. Mrs. Thornby leaned forward. That matters, Miss Whitmore. It matters to those 6 children who still come. It matters to Thomas and Emma, who found something to believe in besides surviving. And it matters to His Grace, who spent years hating his inheritance and finally has a reason to fight for it. None of that matters if Thorne wins. Thorne's already lost the thing he valued most, unchallenged control. You've shown people it's possible to resist. That alone has changed everything. Mrs. Thornby stood. Now the question is whether you're brave enough to see it through, or whether you'll run again when it gets truly hard. She left before Elena could respond. The words sat heavy in the quiet library. Run again. Was that what she'd done in London? Run from the humiliation instead of facing it? Was she about to do the same thing here? Elena looked around at Adrian's books, at the life he'd built in defiance of his father's legacy, at the choice he'd made to fight instead of simply inherit. She thought about Thomas learning to control his future, about Peter discovering the world beyond his valley, about Emma reading her mother's stories. She thought about Julian, who'd chosen safety over integrity when the stakes rose, and about who she wanted to be in the moments that defined her. The decision crystallized with unexpected clarity. She found Adrian in his study, working through correspondence. He looked up when she entered, his expression cautious. "I'm not leaving," Elena said. "I know that's probably what you're expecting, that I'll quit before Thorne destroys both of us. But I'm not. I wasn't going to ask you to leave." "I know. That's part of why I'm staying." Elena moved closer. "He's going to escalate again. The notices didn't work well enough. He'll try something worse. Probably. And you're still willing to fight beside me?" Adrian set down his pen. "Elena, I'd fight beside you against the whole damn country if necessary. The question has never been whether I'm willing. It's whether you truly understand what you're committing to." "I do." She felt the truth of it settle in her bones. "For the first time in my life, I actually do." The attack came 3 nights later, more vicious than anything before. Someone slaughtered Adrian's livestock, not for meat or profit, but for terror. 30 sheep dead in their pen, throats cut, left to rot as a message that couldn't be misunderstood. Elena woke to the sounds of men shouting, stumbled outside in her borrowed nightgown to find Adrian standing in the carnage, his face carved from stone. The sheep lay in spreading pools of blood, their eyes still open and accusatory. "He's not even pretending anymore," Adrian said quietly. "This is pure intimidation. We should call the magistrate. The magistrate answers to men like Thorne. He'll rule it vandalism, maybe fine someone a few pounds, and nothing will change." Adrian turned to face her. "This is what I meant about consequences. He's not going to stop until we're destroyed or gone, and I can't protect you from someone willing to go this far." "I'm not asking for protection." Elena stepped closer, her bare feet cold in the morning dew. "I'm asking if you're still willing to fight." Adrian looked at her, really looked, like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're remarkable," he said quietly, "and terrifying, and absolutely insane for not running right now." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." He reached for her hand again, that gesture that had become familiar. "But Elena, we need to understand. Thorne's not going to stop at property damage. If we keep pushing, he'll come for us personally. Our lives, our futures, everything." "I know." Elena squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses from work he'd done rebuilding the village school. From labor no duke should have needed to perform. But some things are worth risking everything for. You taught me that. Dawn broke over the slaughtered sheep, painting the blood golden and beautiful and terrible. In the distance, smoke rose from morning fires in the village, people waking, living, surviving. Unaware that in this moment, on this blood-soaked ground, 2 people were choosing to burn down their own safety for the chance that those distant lives might have something better. The war had been quiet at first, then loud. Now it was entering its final, most dangerous phase, the one where someone would break. Elena just had to make sure it wasn't her. Elena spent the morning after the slaughter helping Adrian's men dispose of the carcasses, her hands cramping from the work, her borrowed dress soaked with blood that wouldn't wash out. She worked until her shoulders screamed and her mind went blessedly blank, until there was nothing but the physical reality of destruction that needed cleaning. Thomas found her at midday, sitting on the stone wall that bordered the sheep pen, staring at nothing. "They're saying you're cursed," he said without preamble. "That bad luck follows you from London." "Maybe they're right. Or maybe Thorne's just good at making people afraid." Thomas sat beside her. "My father came home drunk last night. Said Thorne's offering money to any man willing to testify you've been inappropriate with students, trying to build a case to have you arrested." Elena's head snapped up. "That's insane!" "Doesn't matter if it is true. Just matters if people believe it." Thomas picked at the mortar between stones. "He's going to keep coming until you break or leave. You know that, right?" "I know." Elena looked toward the village, where smoke still rose from morning fires, where families were waking to another day of survival under Thorne's control. "But I also know that if I leave, he wins. And every child who might have learned to question, to read, to calculate their own worth, they lose that chance." "So what do we do?" The question hung between them, heavy with expectation. Elena realized Thomas wasn't asking rhetorically. He genuinely wanted her answer, believed she might have one. The responsibility of that trust settled on her already burdened shoulders. "We changed the game," she said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke. "Thorne's been controlling this through fear and economic pressure. He owns the land, employs the people, uses that power to enforce compliance. But what if we removed his leverage? How? He owns everything." "Not everything." Elena stood, her mind racing ahead. "He doesn't own skill, he doesn't own knowledge, and he doesn't own what people can become if they have options." She turned to Thomas. "What if we taught the adults too? Not just children, their parents. Teach them accounting, reading, contract law. Arm them with the tools to recognize when they're being cheated or manipulated." Thomas's eyes widened. That would terrify him. Exactly. Because right now his power depends on people not knowing any better. But educated people ask questions. They demand fair wages. They recognize when contracts are designed to trap them. Elena felt energy returning, sharpening her thoughts. "We've been fighting for the children's future, but we need to fight for their parents' present. Most adults won't come. They're too proud, too tired, too scared. Then we make it worth their while." Elena was already walking toward the manor, Thomas scrambling to keep up. "We offer something practical, something immediately useful. A night class on basic accounting and contract reading. Frame it as protecting themselves from being cheated, not as education." Adrian was in his study, looking like he hadn't slept. He glanced up when Elena burst in, Thomas behind her. "I need your help," she said, "and probably your money again." "For what?" "To teach the adults." Elena explained her plan in rapid sentences, watching Adrian's expression shift from exhausted to interested to genuinely engaged. "If we can teach them to recognize unfair contracts, false accounting, exploitative terms, they become harder to control. Thorne's power starts to erode. He'll see it as a direct attack." "Good. Because it is." Elena leaned on his desk. "We've been playing defense, reacting to his moves. I'm tired of reacting. It's time to make him react to us." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, then smiled, a sharp, fierce expression that transformed his face. "My father would have called this dangerous radicalism." "What do you call it?" "Long overdue." He stood, moving to his bookshelf. "I have accounting ledgers, contract examples, legal texts. We can use actual documents, show them what to look for." He pulled down several volumes. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow night, after work hours. And we need to make it clear this isn't charity, it's self-preservation." Elena looked at Thomas. "Can you spread word, quietly, to people you trust?" "What do I tell them?" "Tell them we're offering free lessons in recognizing when someone's cheating them. Tell them it's practical, useful, and completely optional." Elena paused. "And tell them Robert Thorne doesn't want them to come. That usually works." Thomas grinned and left. Adrian watched him go, then turned to Elena. "This could work," he said quietly. "Or it could get people hurt. Thorne won't tolerate his workforce learning to question him." "I know, but doing nothing guarantees they stay trapped." Elena met his gaze. "You told me once that every revolution starts with someone learning to question. We're just accelerating the process." The first night, 7 people came, all men, all looking like they expected a trap. Elena had set up in Adrian's largest receiving room, with examples of common contracts laid out on tables, ledgers showing typical farm accounting, basic legal documents people might encounter. "Thank you for coming," she began, fighting nervousness. "I know you're tired from working all day, so am I going to waste your time with theory or lectures? We're going to look at actual contracts and accounts, and I'm going to show you how to spot when someone's cheating you." That got their attention. Elena picked up a standard tenant farming agreement, one she'd copied from Adrian's estate records. "This is a typical lease. Who here rents land from Thorne or someone similar?" 4 hands went up. "Good. Look at this clause here, Section 7. It says the landlord can increase rent at his discretion with 30 days' notice. Anyone know what at his discretion means?" Silence. Then one man said, "Means he decides?" "Exactly. Which means he can raise your rent anytime, for any reason, and you have no recourse. Now look at Section 12. It says if you fail to pay increased rent, You forfeit all improvements to the land, buildings, wells, fences, anything you've built yourself. She watched comprehension dawn on their faces, saw the anger that followed. One man, she recognized him as Thorne's tenant, stood abruptly.
That's not right. I built a whole storage barn last year. You're saying if Thorne raises my rent and I can't pay, he keeps the barn? According to this contract, yes. But I paid for it, materials and labor.
Doesn't matter. You signed a contract that gives him ownership of any improvements. Elena softened her voice. That's why you need to read carefully before signing anything. And why you need to know basic accounting, so you can track whether what you're being charged matches what you're owed. The session ran 2 hours. By the end, all 7 men were angry, energized, and asking questions faster than Elena could answer them. They wanted copies of their own contracts to review. They wanted to learn more accounting. They wanted to understand the systems that had been controlling them while disguised as simple business arrangements.
Come back Thursday, Elena said. Bring your contracts, your account books if you keep them. Any documents you've signed that you don't fully understand, we'll go through them together. Word spread faster than she'd expected. Thursday brought 15 people, including 3 women who worked in the village shops and wanted to learn accounting. The following week, 23. Elena started running multiple sessions, with Thomas and Emma helping teach basic mathematics while she focused on contracts and legal language. Adrian provided materials, space, and increasingly, his own expertise. He'd spent years managing his estate, dealing with lawyers and agents, navigating the systems designed to protect landed wealth. He knew where the traps were because he'd been taught to set them. Now he was teaching people how to avoid them. This is brilliant, he told Elena after a particularly successful session. You're not just teaching skills, you're teaching skepticism, teaching people to question authority. Teaching people to protect themselves, Elena corrected. But she saw his point. The sessions were changing more than just knowledge levels. People who'd never questioned their circumstances were starting to ask why things were structured as they were, who benefited from those structures, whether alternatives existed. Thorne noticed. His foreman came by yesterday, Mrs. Thornby reported over breakfast. Asked very pointed questions about what we're doing in the evenings, who's attending, what's being taught. What did you tell him? That it's his Grace's house, and none of my concern what he does with it. Mrs. Thornby's expression was carefully neutral. But he knows, and he's not happy. The confrontation came 2 weeks into the adult sessions. Elena was walking back from the village. She'd taken to visiting families during the day, encouraging attendance, building relationships, when a carriage pulled alongside her. Robert Thorne stepped out. Miss Whitmore, a word. Elena stopped but didn't approach. What do you want? To understand your end game. Thorne moved closer, his expression more curious than angry. The children, I understood, misguided idealism playing at purpose, but teaching adults? Showing them contracts, accounts, legal language? That's not education, that's sedition. That's self-defense. It's teaching my workers to question their arrangements, to demand what they haven't earned, to think they deserve better than what I provide. Thorne's voice hardened. Do you have any idea what happens when the lower classes start getting ideas above their station? Chaos, violence, the complete breakdown of social order. Or maybe just fair wages and honest contracts. There's nothing dishonest about my contracts. They're standard agreements. Standard agreements designed to trap people in perpetual debt while you profit from their labor and improvements. Elena kept her voice steady. I've read your contracts, Mr. Thorne. I've seen how they're structured, and I've watched people realize for the first time that the system isn't inevitable. It's designed by people like you. Thorne's face darkened. You've made a grave mistake. Probably, but I'm going to keep making it. Elena started to walk away, then turned back. One more thing. I know you're looking for men willing to lie about me in exchange for money. You won't find any, because the people here have started to learn that your money comes with strings that strangle. They're tired of being controlled by someone who sees them as property instead of people. She left him standing there, her heart hammering, but her stride steady. That night, Adrian doubled the guards again, but the retaliation didn't come as violence. It came as economics. 3 of the men who'd been attending sessions lost their jobs. Not directly fired, that would have been too obvious, but their work hours were mysteriously cut to almost nothing, their contracts suddenly up for review, their rent somehow due early. Thorne was squeezing them,
demonstrating the cost of education. Elena watched it happen with growing fury and helplessness. These men had families. They couldn't afford to lose work or homes because they'd attended her sessions. "We have to stop," one of them told her, his face haggard. "I can't risk my family for this." "I understand." Elena did. She understood completely, hated the impossible choice Thorne had forced. "I'm sorry." But two of the other men made a different choice. "I'm not stopping," James Miller said. He worked Thorne's largest farm, had 5 children, should have been most vulnerable to pressure. "My son comes to your children's lessons. He's learning to read. For the first time, he's talking about what he might do when he grows up. Not what he'll have to do, but what he might choose." James's voice roughened. "That's worth losing work for. That's worth risk." "James, let me finish." He held up a hand. "Thorne thinks cutting my hours will break me. But you taught me accounting, remember? I've been tracking what he pays versus what he charges for supplies and rent. I'm barely breaking even working full time. Less hours means less he can squeeze from me. I'll find other work that doesn't come with contracts designed to trap me." "Where?" "He owns most of the employment around here. Then I'll work for his grace. Or start my own small holding, or leave entirely." James met her eyes. "The point is, I now know I have choices. Before your lessons, I thought this was just how life worked. Now I know it's how Thorne wants it to work. That's power, Miss Whitmore. Don't take that away from me by stopping." Elena felt something tight in her chest release. This was why. This moment when someone realized they had agency, had options, had worth beyond what they'd been told. This was what made all the risk worthwhile. "Then we keep going," she said. "But we need to be strategic. We need to help people find alternatives to Thorne's employment before we push them to leave it." Adrian had been listening from the doorway. "I can hire 20 men immediately. Estate work, farm labor, maintenance, fair wages, contracts they can actually read and understand. That's charity. That's business. I've needed more workers for years but couldn't compete with Thorne's control of the labor pool. If men are willing to leave him, I'm willing to hire them." Adrian moved into the room. "And once a few succeed, others will follow. That's how you break monopolies, by proving alternatives exist." Over the next month, the pattern repeated. Thorne would squeeze someone who attended the sessions. Adrian would offer them work. Not all took it. Fear was powerful, and change was hard, but enough did that it started to shift the dynamic. Thorne's absolute control began developing cracks. The village noticed. Families who'd thought themselves trapped in perpetual tenancy started asking questions about their contracts. Workers began calculating whether what they earned actually exceeded what they owed. Small rebellions sprouted. A request for fairer terms here, a demand for honest accounting there. Nothing revolutionary, but accumulating into something that resembled collective resistance. And the children kept learning. Elena's daytime lessons had grown to 19 students, despite Thorne's continued campaign against her. Parents who'd pulled their children out started sending them back, reasoning that if the adults were risking Thorne's wrath for education, the children deserved the same chance. Thomas had become truly invaluable, teaching younger students while managing his own advanced work, helping his father navigate the farm accounting with new knowledge, even starting to keep detailed records that proved the farm's potential profitability if freed from exploitative contracts. "Pa's talking about buying our land," Thomas told Elena one afternoon, wonder in his voice. "Actually buying it instead of renting. Never thought that was possible before." "Is it possible? Maybe. If we can save enough, if the owner's willing to sell, if we can negotiate fair terms." Thomas grinned. "Big ifs. But you taught me how to figure out what we'd need, how to structure payments, what to watch for in contracts. That makes it possible instead of just dreaming." Elena watched him walk away. This boy who'd been angry and defensive 2 months ago, now talking about negotiating property purchases and business planning. That transformation, that was what Thorne couldn't burn or intimidate or legislate away. The turning point came from an unexpected direction. Father Benedict appeared at the estate on a Tuesday evening, looking uncomfortable but determined. Mrs. Thornby showed him to the library where Elena and Adrian were preparing materials for that night's session. "Father," Elena said, surprised, "is something wrong?" "Many things are wrong." The priest twisted his hat in his hands. "Miss Whitmore, I owe you an apology.
I was a coward when you asked for help. I prioritized Mr. Thorne's contributions over the needs of my congregation, and I'm ashamed of that. Elena exchanged glances with Adrian. What changed? I've been watching what you're doing. The children learning, the adults attending sessions, families starting to question arrangements they'd always accepted. Father Benedict set down his hat, and I've been listening to confessions, people telling me about contracts they didn't understand, debts that somehow never decrease no matter how much they pay, feeling trapped and helpless. He looked directly at Elena. You're helping them, actually helping, not just offering platitudes about accepting their lot. Thank you, Elena said carefully, but I'm not sure what you're asking. I'm asking if you'll hold your lessons in the church, officially, with my blessing. Let it be known that I support what you're doing. Father Benedict straightened. Mr. Thorne can threaten my funding, but he can't threaten my faith, and my faith tells me that helping people understand the systems that oppress them is holy work. Adrian spoke up. Father, Thorne will retaliate. You know that. Let him. I've been his puppet for too long. It's time I remembered who I actually serve. The priest managed a weak smile. Besides, Miss Whitmore's been teaching in the churchyard through rain and cold. The least I can do is offer her actual shelter. Elena felt something shift, not dramatically, but definitively. Father Benedict wasn't powerful like Adrian or wealthy like Thorne, but he represented something important, moral authority. His public support would change the narrative from dangerous radical teaching sedition to church-sanctioned education for community improvement. We accept, she said. Thank you, Father, truly. The announcement that Sunday caused exactly the chaos Elena expected. Father Benedict made it from the pulpit, speaking about the importance of knowledge and the moral duty to help people protect themselves from exploitation. He cited scripture, though Elena noticed he carefully avoided anything too revolutionary, and invited anyone interested to attend lessons at the church starting that week. Thorne walked out mid-sermon, his exit loud and pointed. A third of the congregation followed him, families dependent on his employment, tenants afraid of retaliation, people who'd decided safety mattered more than education. But 2/3 remained, and after the service, a line formed of people wanting to know more about the lessons, asking questions about contracts and accounting, and whether it was true you could learn to read at any age. This is remarkable, Adrian murmured, watching the crowd. You've actually done it. You've made education desirable instead of threatening. We've made survival skills desirable, Elena corrected. That's different than education for its own sake, but it's a start. That week, 43 people attended evening sessions at the church. Elena split them into groups by skill level and need. Contract reading for tenants, business accounting for shopkeepers, basic literacy for those who'd never learned. Adrian taught advanced financial concepts. Thomas and Emma helped with fundamentals. Even Mrs. Thornby appeared one night, offering to teach household budgeting to women who managed family finances. The work was exhausting. Elena fell into bed each night with her throat raw from talking, her fingers cramped from writing, her mind buzzing with questions she'd been asked and problems she'd been presented. But she'd never felt more purposeful, more necessary, more aligned with something that actually mattered. Thorne's response escalated with his frustration. He raised rents across the board, citing increased property taxes. He cut wages for anyone attending lessons. He spread rumors about Elena and Adrian, scandalous implications about why a duke would house an unmarried woman, suggestions that the lessons were cover for something immoral. But he'd miscalculated. He'd pushed too hard, too obviously. And people who'd been learning to question started questioning him. Why did rent increase when taxes didn't? James Miller asked at a village meeting, armed with documentation Elena had helped him find. Public records show property tax rates stayed flat this year. Why did wages decrease while crop prices increased? Another man demanded. If you're making more profit, shouldn't that be shared with the workers who generated it? What's the actual market rate for our wool? A shepherd wanted to know. Because you're paying us 2 shillings per pound, but selling it for 7. That's not normal markup. Thorne tried to shut down the questions, to reassert authority through force of personality and economic power. But the people asking had learned enough to persist, to demand answers, to recognize that because I said so wasn't actually an answer. The final crack came from Louisa Pemberton. Elena was teaching an evening session when Louisa appeared at the church door, looking pale and determined. She'd arrived in Northshire 2 weeks earlier with Julian,
Their marriage had happened quickly and quietly, far from London's gossiping crowds. Elena had managed to avoid them both, which she'd counted as success. Now Louisa stood in the doorway, and the room went silent. "I need to speak with Miss Whitmore," Louisa said. "Privately, please." Elena's first instinct was to refuse, to maintain the careful distance she'd built. But something in Louisa's expression, desperation maybe, or determination, made her reconsider. "Take a break," she told her students. "We'll resume in 15 minutes." She led Louisa to the small rector's office, closing the door behind them. They stood facing each other, this woman who'd taken Elena's fiancé and the woman whose life she'd inadvertently destroyed. "Why are you here?" Elena asked, not unkindly. "Because I need help, and you're the only person who might understand." Louisa's voice was steady despite her obvious fear. "Julian didn't tell me the truth about his finances. About anything, really. Mother arranged everything, the engagement, the wedding, the settlement. I thought I was marrying someone who'd provide security." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out the Cartwright fortune is mostly debt disguised as assets. And now we're here because Julian owes money to people in London, and Northshire was supposed to be a fresh start." Elena processed this. "What does this have to do with me? Julian's trying to partner with Robert Thorne, some kind of investment scheme involving tenant contracts and land speculation. I don't understand all of it, but I know it's designed to squeeze more profit from people who already have nothing." Louisa met her eyes. "I overheard them talking. Thorne wants to buy up more land, consolidate control, raise rents high enough to force people into permanent debt. He sees your lessons as a direct threat to that plan. Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm trapped in a marriage to a man who lied to me, who's planning to help exploit vulnerable people for profit, and I don't know what else to do." Louisa's voice broke slightly. "I'm not good like you. I'm not brave. But I can't just watch this happen. So I'm telling you, they're meeting tomorrow night at Thorne's manor to finalize the arrangement. If you want to stop them, that's when." Elena stared at her, this woman she'd hated from a distance, who'd taken her life and now seemed as trapped as Elena had ever been. "Louisa, if you testify to this, if you go public with what you know, I can't. Julian would, it would destroy me. Divorce, scandal, worse than what you faced in London." Louisa shook her head. "But I can give you information, dates, numbers, plans, things you could use if you knew how to look for them." "I don't understand. Why help me if you won't go public?" "Because you're right. About education, about giving people tools to protect themselves. I see what you're doing here, and it's what I wish someone had done for me before I signed my life away to a man I didn't know." Louisa pulled papers from her bag, copies of documents, correspondence, financial projections. "This is everything I could find. I don't know if it's enough." Elena took the papers, scanning them quickly. Contract templates, rent increase schedules, projected profits from what looked like calculated impoverishment of Thorne's tenants, and correspondence between Thorne and Julian discussing how to structure arrangements to maximize profit while minimizing legal liability. "This is enough," Elena said quietly. "Louisa, this is more than enough." "Then use it. Stop them." Louisa moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, sorry. About Julian, about London, about everything. You deserved better than what happened." "So did you," Elena said, and meant it. After Louisa left, Elena sat with the documents, her mind racing. This wasn't just evidence of Thorne's exploitation. It was proof. Concrete, documented proof that his rent increases had nothing to do with taxes or expenses and everything to do with deliberate extraction of wealth from vulnerable people. She found Adrian in the church, helping Thomas work through a complex accounting problem. He looked up when she entered, saw her expression, and immediately dismissed Thomas. "What happened?" Elena spread the documents on the table. "We have him. Louisa Pemberton, Julian's wife, brought me proof of Thorne's plans. He's not just maintaining control, he's actively planning to increase exploitation. And she's given us everything we need to prove it." Adrian scanned the papers, his expression darkening with each page. "This is damning. If this became public, he'd be ruined, not just locally, but legally. These projected profits are built on contract terms that are probably illegal. And if we can prove he's deliberately engineering tenant debt, we need to be careful." Adrian set down the papers,
If we move too fast, too publicly, Thorne will destroy these documents and us along with them. We need to use this strategically. What are you suggesting? A public meeting, in the church, with Father Benedict presiding. We present evidence of Thorne's practices, explain what his contracts actually mean, show people exactly how they're being exploited. Adrian's eyes gleamed. Make it impossible for him to deny or hide. Force him to either defend practices that are indefensible or admit wrongdoing. He'll never come to a meeting like that. He will if we make it about something else. A community discussion about economic improvement, village development. Frame it as collaborative planning. Adrian smiled grimly, then ambush him with the truth. Elena felt a surge of fierce satisfaction. This was it, the moment they stopped reacting and started controlling the narrative. When? This Sunday after service. Maximum attendance, public setting, Father Benedict's official sanction. Adrian began organizing the documents. We have 3 days to prepare. Let's make them count. The announcement went out Friday, a community meeting to discuss economic development and improve prosperity for Northshire. Father Benedict made it sound collaborative and positive. Thorne, hungry to control any narrative about village economics, confirmed his attendance. Sunday arrived cold and clear. The church filled to capacity. Tenants, workers, shopkeepers, families who'd been attending lessons, and plenty of people who were simply curious. Thorne arrived fashionably late, Julian Cartwright beside him, looking uncomfortable. They took seats near the front, Thorne's expression suggesting this was his meeting and everyone should remember it. Father Benedict opened with a prayer for wisdom and clarity. Nothing controversial, but Elena caught the slight emphasis on truth and justice. Then he handed the floor to Adrian. "Thank you all for coming," Adrian began. "We're here to discuss Northshire's economic future. Specifically, we want to talk about the arrangements that govern most people's livelihoods, tenancy contracts, wage structures, rent schedules. We think it's time everyone understood exactly how these systems work." Thorne shifted. "This seems unnecessary. The current arrangements have served the village well for generations." "Have they?" Elena stood, moving to the front with a stack of documents. "Let's examine that. Mr. Thorne, you raised rents across your properties last month, correct? Standard adjustment for increased costs. Which costs specifically?" Elena consulted her papers. "Property taxes remained flat this year. You made no infrastructure improvements. Your maintenance expenses actually decreased according to these records." She held up Louisa's documents. "So what increased costs justified a 20% rent increase?" Thorne's face reddened. "Where did you get those papers?" "That's not the question. The question is why you claim tax increases that didn't happen to justify rent increases that did." Elena turned to the crowd. "This is what we've been teaching in evening lessons. How to recognize when someone's lying to you. How to spot false justifications and demand real accountability. This is slanders. This is documentation." Adrian took over seamlessly. "And it gets worse. Mr. Thorne's contracts include clauses that trap tenants in permanent debt. Any improvements they make to properties become his property. Rent can be increased without justification. Late payments, even by a single day, trigger penalties that often exceed the original debt." Elena watched the crowd's faces, saw the recognition dawning. These were things they'd experienced but never understood were deliberate rather than inevitable. James Miller stood. "Mr. Thorne, I've paid rent for 15 years on my farm. According to your own records, I've paid enough to have purchased the land 3 times over. Why don't I own it?" "Because you rent, not buy. That's the agreement. An agreement you designed to ensure I'd never be able to buy." James's voice was steady, backed by the accounting knowledge Elena had taught him. "Every time I get close to saving enough for a down payment, you raise my rent. Every time I make an improvement that increases property value, you claim ownership. That's not business. That's entrapment." Other voices joined in, people asking about wages that didn't match work performed, about debts that never decreased despite regular payments, about contract terms they'd signed without understanding. The questions came faster, harder, backed by the education Elena and Adrian had provided. Thorne tried to regain control, to assert authority through volume and intimidation, but he was drowning in evidence and questions he couldn't adequately answer. Then Julian Cartwright stood. "Robert, perhaps we should address these concerns." "Sit down, Cartwright. This doesn't concern you."
Actually, it does, because I've invested money in partnership with you, and if these accusations are true, Julian looked genuinely uncomfortable. I need to know if our ventures are built on exploitation. Our ventures are built on sound business principles. No. The voice came from the back. Louisa Pemberton stood, shaking but determined. They're built on deliberately trapping people in debt. I know because I've seen the projections, the contracts, the planning documents that show exactly how you engineer poverty for profit. The room exploded. Thorne shouted denials. Julian looked sick. Elena caught Louisa's eye across the crowd and saw a woman who'd chosen truth over security, who'd found her own form of courage. Father Benedict's voice cut through the chaos. Enough! Mr. Thorne, these are serious accusations. If you have evidence to refute them, present it. Otherwise, I think this community deserves honest answers about how their labor and rent money is being used. Thorne looked around the church, at faces that had once deferred to him automatically, now questioning, skeptical, armed with just enough knowledge to be dangerous. He saw his control slipping, his absolute authority challenged by people who'd learned to do math and read contracts. This meeting is over, he said, standing abruptly. I don't answer to any of you. Then maybe you shouldn't control all of us, James Miller said quietly. Maybe it's time we found landlords who are willing to be honest, employers who pay fairly, partnerships based on respect instead of exploitation. Thorne stormed out, Julian trailing behind him looking lost. But the room didn't empty. Instead, people stayed, talking excitedly, asking more questions, comparing their own contracts to the examples Elena had shown. The energy was electric. Not revolutionary violence, but something perhaps more dangerous. Collective realization that change was possible. Adrian found Elena after most people had left. You did it. You actually did it. We did it. Elena felt exhausted and exhilarated. But this isn't over. Thorne will retaliate. Probably harder than before. Let him try. He's lost the one thing he absolutely needed, the appearance of legitimacy. Everyone saw him refuse to answer fair questions about his practices. They saw him exposed. Adrian smiled. You didn't just teach them to read, Elena. You taught them to question. That's irreversible. Outside, the sun was setting over Northshire, painting the valley in shades of amber and rust. Elena stood watching families walk home, talking animatedly, carrying with them new knowledge and new possibilities. Somewhere among them, Thomas was probably planning how his father could buy their farm. Emma was perhaps reading her mother's books with new understanding. Peter was seeing the world beyond his valley with clarity that would shape his entire future. And Louisa, trapped in her own version of Elena's London scandal, had found a way to fight back that didn't require public martyrdom. Sometimes courage looked like grand gestures. Sometimes it looked like passing documents to someone braver while keeping your own head down. Elena thought about the woman she'd been when she arrived. Broken, humiliated, running from scandal toward something she'd hoped would feel like purpose. She'd found purpose. But more than that, she'd found herself in the process. Not the perfect version she'd been taught to perform, but the flawed, fierce, occasionally terrified version that showed up anyway and fought for things that mattered. What happens now? She asked Adrian. Now we keep going. Keep teaching. Keep building alternatives. Keep proving that Thorne's way isn't the only way. Adrian turned to face her. And we prepare for whatever he throws at us next, because he's not finished. Neither are we. Elena looked back at the church where Father Benedict was extinguishing candles, where evidence of Thorne's exploitation sat on tables for anyone to examine, where the foundations of absolute control had begun their collapse. This was what victory looked like in its early stages, not dramatic or complete, but undeniable. A crack in the wall that might eventually bring the whole structure down. She'd come to Northshire thinking she was teaching children to read. Instead, she'd helped ignite something larger, the dangerous, thrilling idea that people deserved better than what they'd been given, and that knowledge was the first step toward claiming it. Thorne would fight back. He'd escalate. He'd probably try to destroy her completely before this was over. But for the first time since Julian's betrayal had shattered her London life, Elena felt ready for whatever came next. Not because she knew she'd win, but because she'd finally found something worth losing for. The war wasn't over, but they'd won the battle that mattered most. The one for hearts and minds, for belief that change was possible. Everything else was just details. The details arrived with Monday's dawn, and they were worse than Elena had anticipated. Thorne filed a formal complaint with the regional magistrate, accusing Elena of theft of private documents, defamation of character, and inciting civil unrest. The charges were absurd. Any competent lawyer would tear them apart. But that wasn't the point. The point was the spectacle, the public accusation, the suggestion that Elena was a criminal rather than an educator. "He's trying to discredit you before the truth spreads further," Adrian said, pacing his study while Elena read the summons. "If he can make you look like a liar and a thief, people will question everything you've taught them." "When's the hearing?" "Friday, in the county seat, which means Thorne's territory. The magistrate is his second cousin." Adrian's jaw tightened. This is a trap designed to humiliate you publicly and legitimize his version of events. Elena set down the summons carefully. Her hands wanted to shake, but she wouldn't let them. "Then we need a better lawyer than he expects, and evidence he can't refute." "I'll hire the best solicitor in the region." "No." Elena looked up at him. That plays into his narrative. The rich duke protecting his kept woman. "We need someone unexpected, someone with credibility Thorne can't attack." "Who?" The answer came from an unlikely source. That afternoon, a carriage arrived bearing a London law firm's seal. The man who emerged was perhaps 50, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, carrying a leather case that looked expensive. "Miss Elena Whitmore?" he asked when Mrs. Thornby showed him to the library. "Yes?" "Charles Pemberton, solicitor, Lady Pemberton, my wife, sent me." He set his case on the table. "My daughter Louisa told us what's happening here, about the documents she provided, about Mr. Thorne's practices, about the charges he's filed against you." He paused. "My wife and I feel some responsibility for your situation. Our encouragement of Louisa's marriage to Mr. Cartwright inadvertently put you in London's spotlight. The least we can do is ensure you're properly represented now." Elena stared at him. "Your wife encouraged that marriage. She was thrilled when Julian abandoned me. She was thrilled about the social advantage and didn't ask enough questions about Mr. Cartwright's actual financial situation." Pemberton's expression was rueful. "We've since learned he misrepresented nearly everything, leaving our daughter trapped in a marriage built on lies. She's trying to make the best of it, but—" He opened his case, pulling out documents. "This isn't charity, Miss Whitmore. It's an apology. And frankly, taking down a man like Thorne using his own paperwork against him is exactly the kind of case I enjoy." Adrian had been listening from the doorway. "Can you win? Can I prove that Miss Whitmore's accusations are factually accurate, that Thorne's contracts are exploitative, and that these charges are retaliatory nonsense designed to silence criticism?" Pemberton smiled coldly. "Yes, Your Grace. I can absolutely prove that." The week before the hearing was a blur of preparation. Pemberton interviewed everyone who'd attended lessons, documented contract terms, gathered evidence of Thorne's practices with the methodical precision of someone who knew exactly where legal vulnerabilities lived. He was, Elena realized, exactly what Thorne hadn't planned for: a London lawyer with more credentials and experience than anyone Thorne could hire, working for free out of principle rather than payment. "He's going to claim you stole those documents," Pemberton told Elena during one strategy session. "We need to establish that they were freely given by someone with legitimate access to them." Louisa: "But she can't testify." "She won't have to. I'll testify that my daughter provided them to my firm, acting as a concerned party with access to her husband's business papers. Spousal privilege protects her, professional privilege protects me, and the document's authenticity becomes the issue, not their source." "That's brilliant," Adrian said. "That's law." Pemberton allowed himself a small smile. "Mr. Thorne is used to winning through intimidation and economic pressure. He's not accustomed to opponents who actually understand how the system works. That's our advantage." But Thorne had one more move to make, and it was vicious. Thursday evening, the night before the hearing, Julian Cartwright appeared at the estate. Mrs. Thornby found Elena in the library and announced him with an expression that suggested she'd rather announce plague. "He says it's urgent," she said. "Personal. I told him you're not receiving visitors, but he's insisting." Elena exchanged glances with Adrian, who'd been helping her review testimony. "Send him in." Julian looked worse than Elena remembered. Thinner, older, with a desperate edge that made him seem almost pitiable.
He stood in the library doorway like a man facing execution. Elena, thank you for seeing me. I haven't decided if I'm actually seeing you or just satisfying curiosity about why you're here. Elena stayed seated, refusing to give him the advantage of height. What do you want, Julian? To warn you. And to apologize. He moved into the room, keeping distance between them. Thorne's planning something for tomorrow. I don't know exactly what, but he's been meeting with people, witnesses who will testify against you. He's building a case that goes beyond the documents, that paints you as dangerous and unstable. I'm aware he's doing that. It's obvious. You don't understand. Julian's hands clenched. He's talked to people in London, people who knew you before, who remember the scandal. He's bringing in witnesses who will testify about your behavior after He faltered. After the engagement ended. He's going to argue you were unstable then, that you fled London rather than face consequences, that everything you've done here is the continuation of some kind of breakdown. Elena felt ice settle in her stomach. She'd known Thorne would attack her character, but she hadn't anticipated him weaponizing her actual pain. The weeks after Julian's betrayal, when she'd barely been functional, when Margaret had worried about her sleeping and eating, when she'd been legitimately falling apart. There are witnesses to that? She asked quietly. Servants who saw you at your lowest. People who'll say you were erratic, unstable, possibly dangerous. Julian's voice was hollow. Elena, I'm sorry. I know I have no right to apologize, no right to even be here, but I can't watch him destroy you using pain I caused and do nothing. Why do you care? Adrian's voice was hard. You destroyed her reputation once. Why stop him from finishing the job? Because I was wrong. Julian finally looked at Elena directly. I married Louisa for money that turned out to be mostly debt. I abandoned you for security that was an illusion. And now I watch you here, actually helping people, actually building something meaningful, while I'm trapped in a marriage I hate, partnered with a man I despise, living a life I don't recognize. His voice cracked. You deserved better than what I did. And you definitely deserve better than what Thorne's planning. Elena studied him. This man she'd once thought she'd marry, who'd seemed so certain and secure, now revealed as exactly what he'd always been. Someone who chose expedience over integrity and was finally realizing the cost. What exactly is he planning? She asked. He's going to argue you're mentally unfit, that your teaching isn't education but indoctrination born from instability, that the children should be protected from you, the adults prevented from being manipulated by you. Julian pulled papers from his coat. These are copies of the witness statements he's compiled. Pemberton should see them. Adrian took the papers, scanning them quickly. His face darkened. This is character assassination. It's also probably effective, Pemberton said, appearing in the doorway. He'd been staying at the estate during preparation. If Thorne can establish a pattern of instability, he can argue Miss Whitmore's accusations stem from delusion rather than fact. It shifts the entire case from, did he exploit people, to, is she credible enough to believe? Can we fight it? Elena asked. Yes, but we need to reframe the narrative. Pemberton took the papers, reading carefully. Mr. Cartwright, would you be willing to testify? Julian blanched. About what? About why Miss Whitmore left London. The actual circumstances, your betrayal, her humiliation, her decision to rebuild elsewhere rather than wallow in scandal. Pemberton's eyes were calculating. If we establish that her departure was rational response to genuine trauma rather than flight from instability, we undermine Thorne's entire argument. Julian can't testify against himself like that, Elena protested. It would destroy what little reputation he has left. I don't care. Julian's voice was firm. Elena's right. I chose expedience once, and it's cost me everything that actually mattered. If testifying helps her and damages me, that seems like appropriate justice. Elena looked at this man who'd broken her heart, who'd chosen safety over love, who was now offering to publicly humiliate himself to protect her. She should have felt vindicated or satisfied. Instead, she just felt tired. Julian, you don't have to do this. Yes, I do. He met her eyes. Not for you, really. For me. So I can look at myself and know I finally did one honest thing. Pemberton nodded slowly. Then we have our counter strategy. Miss Whitmore wasn't fleeing instability. She was pursuing purpose after betrayal. Every witness who speaks to her pain in London actually supports our case that she came here to rebuild, not to break down. Thorne won't expect this, Adrian said. No. He's expecting her to hide from her past, to let him define her story. Pemberton smiled coldly. Instead, we're going to own it. Make her vulnerability the proof of her strength rather than evidence of weakness. Friday arrived gray and cold. The county courthouse was exactly what Elena expected. Imposing stone, designed to intimidate, filled with men in expensive clothes who looked at her like she was an interesting specimen. Thorne was already there, flanked by lawyers and looking confident. When he saw Julian enter with Elena's party, his expression flickered with confusion, then anger. The magistrate, an older man with Thorne's same sharp features, called the proceedings to order. Thorne's solicitor opened with exactly the attack Julian had warned about. Elena Whitmore was an unstable woman who'd fled London's scandal, attached herself to a vulnerable duke, and was now spreading seditious ideas disguised as education. The documents she'd presented were stolen. Her accusations were fabrications born from a disturbed mind seeking attention and revenge against men more successful than her failed fiancé. It was brutal and effective. Elena sat through it trying not to flinch, trying not to let the old shame resurface. Adrian's hand found hers under the table, squeezing once. Then Pemberton stood. Your Honor, the defense seems to believe that suffering personal betrayal somehow disqualifies Miss Whitmore from recognizing professional exploitation. I'd like to establish why that's not only false, but actually demonstrates exactly the strength of character she's applied to helping Northshire's residents. He called Julian first. Elena watched her former fiancé take the stand looking like he was walking to his own execution. Mr. Cartwright, you were engaged to Miss Whitmore in London, correct? Yes. And you broke that engagement to marry Miss Louisa Pemberton? Yes. Why? Julian's voice was barely audible. Because my family's finances were failing. The Pembertons offered security. I chose money over honor. And Miss Whitmore's response to this betrayal, was it violent, vindictive? Did she threaten you or Miss Pemberton? No. She withdrew. She was devastated, but handled it with more grace than I deserved. So when she left London, she was fleeing instability or fleeing gossip about something that wasn't her fault. The latter, definitely the latter. Julian looked directly at the magistrate. Elena was humiliated publicly through no fault of her own. She left because staying meant being defined by my failure of character. Coming here was courage, not cowardice. Thorne's solicitor tried to shake him on cross-examination, but Julian held firm. He admitted to the pain he'd caused, to Elena's devastation, but never wavered on characterizing her departure as rational rather than unstable. Next, Pemberton called several of Elena's students and their parents. Thomas testified about what he'd learned, practical accounting that helped his family. Emma spoke about reading her mother's books. James Miller discussed how understanding his contract had given him options he didn't know existed. Did Miss Whitmore ever seem unstable or irrational? Pemberton asked each of them. No. Determined. Sometimes fierce, but never irrational. Then Pemberton produced the documents. Louisa's evidence of Thorne's practices, authenticated through his professional channels, proven to match Thorne's actual business records. He walked through each contract clause, each rent increase, each exploitative term, demonstrating not just that Elena's accusations were true, but that they were understated. Mr. Thorne, Pemberton said during cross-examination, can you explain why your projected tenant income increases by 40% over 5 years, while your stated operating costs remain flat? Business growth. Business growth from what? You're not adding properties. You're not improving services. The only variable that increases is what you extract from existing tenants. Pemberton held up the documents. This isn't growth. It's systematic extraction designed to maximize your profit while ensuring your tenants remain perpetually indebted. That's business. That's exploitation. And Miss Whitmore's crime wasn't instability. It was being educated enough to recognize your practices for what they are and brave enough to expose them. The hearing lasted 6 hours. By the end, Thorne's confident expression had crumbled. The magistrate looked uncomfortable, clearly related to Thorne, but apparently not comfortable with blatant corruption being documented in his court. This court will recess while I consider the evidence, he finally said. Verdict will be delivered Monday morning. They walked out into cold afternoon air, exhausted and uncertain.
Pemberton seemed satisfied, but Elena couldn't tell if that was professional optimism or genuine confidence. "We won," Adrian said quietly as they walked to the carriage. "We presented well," Pemberton corrected. "But the magistrate is Thorne's cousin. Family loyalty sometimes trumps evidence." Julian appeared beside them, looking drained. "I'm leaving Northshire, Louisa and I both are. This place, this life, it's not what either of us thought we were choosing." "Where will you go?" Elena asked. "I don't know. Somewhere we can start over honestly instead of building on lies." He attempted a smile. "Thank you for letting me testify, for letting me do one decent thing." "Julian," Elena stopped him. "I hope you find what you're looking for, whatever that is. I hope you already have." He glanced at Adrian, at the way the Duke stood close to Elena, protective without being possessive. "I think maybe you have." He left. Elena watched him go. This man who'd broken her heart but ultimately given her freedom, and felt nothing but quiet relief that she'd never have to see him again. "Do you think we won?" she asked Adrian as their carriage rolled toward Northshire. "I think we made it impossible for them to pretend ignorance anymore. Whether that's enough..." He trailed off. "We'll know Monday." Monday came slowly. Elena taught her lessons. Attendance had swelled to 23 children now, plus evening sessions that drew 40 adults, and tried not to obsess about the magistrate's decision. Mrs. Thornby baked enough to feed an army, her version of nervous energy. Thomas started a betting pool among students about the outcome. 10 shillings says you win, he told Elena, because the alternative is too awful to accept. That's not how justice works. Maybe not, but it's how hope works. The verdict arrived at noon, a messenger delivering sealed documents to Adrian's estate. They gathered in the library, Elena, Adrian, Mrs. Thornby, Pemberton, who'd stayed through the weekend, and Adrian broke the seal with hands that barely trembled. He read in silence, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up. Dismissed. All charges dismissed. The magistrate ruled that Elena's accusations were supported by evidence, that the documents were obtained legally, and that exposing exploitative practices serves public interest regardless of personal history. Adrian's voice was carefully controlled. Furthermore, he's ordered an investigation into Thorne's business practices, with particular attention to contract terms and tenant treatment. Elena sank into the nearest chair. "We won." "You won," Pemberton corrected. "Miss Whitmore, you took on a man with money, power, and political connections. You beat him using education, evidence, and sheer stubborn courage. That's extraordinary." "That's terrifying," Elena corrected. But she was smiling, couldn't help smiling, felt something tight in her chest finally release. Mrs. Thornby appeared with whiskey, midday drinking, unprecedented, and poured glasses for everyone. "To Miss Whitmore," she said gruffly, "who came here broken and somehow ended up fixing the rest of us." They drank. Elena felt the burn of whiskey and victory mixing into something headier than either alone. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now Thorne faces consequences," Adrian said. "The investigation will take months, but his reputation is destroyed. People know what he's been doing. They won't tolerate it anymore." "And we keep teaching," Elena added. "Keep building alternatives. Keep proving that knowledge is power worth having." Over the following weeks, Northshire transformed in small but definite ways. 3 of Thorne's largest tenants, including James Miller, purchased their land outright, using accounting skills Elena had taught them to negotiate fair terms. Thorne, facing investigation and social ostracism, had little leverage to refuse. 2 other landowners, seeing the tide turning, began offering fair contracts to attract workers away from Thorne's properties. The evening lessons expanded. Elena hired Emma as an assistant teacher. The girl had learned so much she could now teach others. Thomas started an apprenticeship with Pemberton's firm, studying law through correspondence while continuing to help his father run their newly owned farm. The children's classes grew to 30 students, and the school building, the original one that had burned, was being rebuilt. Not as charity, but as community project. Families contributed labor and materials, building something they owned collectively rather than depending on any single benefactor. It would open in spring, a proper school with certified teachers, including Elena, who'd applied for and received teaching credentials through Pemberton's connections. "You're changing everything," Adrian told her one evening. They were walking the grounds, watching sunset paint the valley in shades of gold. Not just education, the entire power structure of this region. We're changing it. I couldn't have done any of this without you.
You could have. You would have. Adrian stopped walking, turning to face her.
Elena, when you arrived here, I thought I was offering you escape, but you turned it into revolution. You took your pain and transformed it into purpose. You're remarkable. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm terrified constantly. I make mistakes. I'm not sure what I'm doing half the time.
I know.
That's what makes it remarkable.
Adrian moved closer.
Perfect people don't change anything because they're too invested in maintaining perfection. Broken people who keep fighting despite their brokenness, they're the ones who actually transform the world.
Is this the part where you make some grand gesture? Elena asked, trying for lightness but hearing the tremor in her voice.
Only if you want it to be. Adrian's expression was serious now, vulnerable in a way she rarely saw.
Elena, I'm not offering rescue. I'm not offering security disguised as partnership. I'm offering actual partnership, messy and complicated and probably difficult.
What kind of partnership? The kind where we keep fighting systems that oppress people, where we build schools and teach children and make wealthy men uncomfortable, where we're honest about being terrified and imperfect and not always sure we're doing the right thing. He paused. And where we're married, if you'll have me. Not because you need saving, but because I'd like to spend my life with someone who reminds me daily that comfort is less important than purpose.
Elena stared at him. This was nothing like Julian's careful proposal in her father's drawing room, full of talk about appropriate alliances and social advantage. This was messy and honest and terrifying and exactly what she hadn't known she wanted. I'm not going to stop teaching, she said. I'm not going to become a decorative duchess who hosts parties and manages households.
I don't want a decorative duchess. I want a partner who will help me burn down my father's legacy and build something better from the ashes. People will talk about us living together before marriage, about my scandal, about propriety. Let them talk. They've been talking anyway.
Elena laughed, surprised it out of her.
This is insane. You know that, right? This is absolutely insane.
I know.
Adrian smiled. Is that a yes?
That's a yes. Elena felt something settle into place, something that had been shifting and uncertain finally finding solid ground. On one condition.
What?
We're equals. Actually equals, not theoretical ones. What I build here isn't yours to control or manage or redirect. It's mine, and you respect that. Always.
Adrian caught her hands. Elena, I've spent my entire life watching men like my father wield power over people who had no recourse. The last thing I want is to replicate that in my own home. You're my equal, or this doesn't work.
Then it works.
Elena felt tears threatening, happy ones, strange after so many months of other kinds.
When?
Whenever you want. Spring when the school opens, summer, tomorrow if you're feeling impulsive.
Spring, Elena decided. Give people time to get used to the idea. Give us time to be sure.
I'm already sure.
I know, but I want to be certain we're choosing this, not just reacting to everything else that's happened.
They walked back to the manor as darkness fell, talking about logistics and practicalities and all the ordinary details that accompanied extraordinary decisions. Elena felt the strangeness of it. Just months ago, she'd been London's favorite scandal, broken and humiliated. Now she was here, planning a future that looked nothing like what she'd been taught to want, and everything like what she actually needed. Spring arrived slowly, then suddenly. The school building finished construction, simple but solid, with a roof that didn't leak and windows that actually closed. They held an opening ceremony that drew families from 3 villages, everyone wanting to see the school that had been built through collective effort rather than imposed charity. Elena stood at the front, looking at 37 students, children who'd learned that education meant opportunity, that knowledge was power, that the circumstances you were born into didn't have to determine the life you lived.
This school belongs to all of you, she told them, not to any single person or family or landowner. You built it, you maintain it, and you decide what it becomes. She paused. That's the real lesson, not just reading or mathematics or history. The lesson is that you have power, you have worth, and you have the right to demand better from the world around you.
Thomas, who'd stayed for the ceremony before returning to his legal apprenticeship, caught her afterward. You changed my life, he said simply. I was going to spend forever trapped on that farm.
watching my father drink away our future. Now I'm studying law, preparing to fight for people who don't have anyone else fighting for them." He swallowed hard. "Thank you doesn't feel adequate, but thank you." "You changed yourself," Elena corrected. "I just showed you it was possible." The wedding was small, held in the church with Father Benedict presiding, attended by villagers who'd become friends and students who'd become family. Emma stood as Elena's witness, looking proud in a new dress made for the occasion. Mrs. Thornby wept openly, then denied it fiercely afterward. Elena wore a simple dress, dove gray with minimal ornamentation, practical and honest, and exactly what she wanted. No performance of perfection, no costume designed to impress. Just her, choosing this life, with this man, in this place that had somehow become home. "Do you take this woman," Father Benedict asked Adrian, "to be your wife, your partner, your equal in all things?" "I do." Adrian said it firmly, no hesitation. "Do you take this man to be your husband, knowing that marriage is work and challenge, and requires honesty even when honesty is difficult?" "I do." Elena felt the weight of it, the commitment not to some fantasy, but to actual partnership with actual difficulty. "I absolutely do." They kissed, brief and slightly awkward, both of them aware of the watching crowd. And then it was done. Elena Whitmore was now Elena Blackthorne, Duchess of Northshire, though she intended to keep teaching under her maiden name because titles and marriage didn't change who she fundamentally was. The celebration afterward was chaotic and loud, villagers bringing food, children running wild, someone producing a fiddle and starting dancing in the church square. Elena watched it all feeling like she'd stepped sideways into someone else's life, someone who was happy and purposeful and surrounded by people who knew her and liked her anyway. "Overwhelming?" Adrian asked, appearing beside her with 2 cups of cider. "Intensely, but good overwhelming." Elena accepted the cider. "Your father would have hated this." "I know. It's one of my favorite parts." Adrian clinked his cup against hers. "To disruption, revolution, and extremely inappropriate duchesses. To partnership, honesty, and burning down systems that need burning." They drank. The celebration continued around them, imperfect and chaotic and absolutely right. 2 years later, Elena stood in that same church square teaching an evening mathematics lesson to 20 adults while simultaneously keeping an eye on her 18-month-old daughter, who was systematically disassembling Mrs. Thornby's knitting basket with focused determination. The older woman watched with what might have been approval or exasperation. With Mrs. Thornby, it was hard to tell the difference. The school now employed 3 full-time teachers and served 60 children from 5 villages. The evening programs had expanded to include vocational training, legal education, and collective organizing workshops that made regional officials deeply nervous. 2 of Thorne's former tenants had won lawsuits against him based on skills learned in Elena's classes. Thorne himself had retreated to Bath, his empire contracted, his reputation destroyed. Thomas had finished his legal apprenticeship and opened a practice focused on representing workers and tenants against exploitative employers and landlords. Emma had enrolled in teacher training in London, planning to return and expand educational opportunities throughout the region. Peter, now 8, was teaching younger children geography using maps he'd drawn himself, showing them a world far larger than their valley. And Elena, watching her daughter determinedly figure out how knitting worked through trial and error, felt something she'd never expected: contentment. Not perfect happiness. She still made mistakes, still doubted herself, still sometimes woke up terrified that she had no idea what she was doing. But contentment that her life meant something, that her choices had mattered, that the pain of Julian's betrayal had somehow transformed into purpose that changed lives. "Miss Whitmore?" One of her adult students raised his hand. "This formula you're showing us for calculating compound interest, could I use it to figure out if my loan terms are fair?" "Exactly what it's for. Bring your loan documents next week. We'll work through them together." Adrian appeared as the lesson ended, taking their daughter so Elena could gather her materials. He'd been meeting with a group of landowners interested in reforming their contract terms. The educational revolution Elena had started was spreading beyond Northshire, and he was helping facilitate it. "How'd it go?" she asked. 3 committed to fair contracts. 2 want to think about it. 1 told me I was corrupting the natural social order and should be ashamed. Adrian grinned. "So about what I expected." They walked home through darkening streets, their daughter babbling incomprehensibly between them, occasionally pointing at things with fierce authority.
Elena thought about the woman she'd been, broken and humiliated, running from scandal toward something she'd hoped would feel like purpose. She'd found purpose, but more than that, she'd found herself. The version that wasn't perfect or polished or performing for approval. The version that showed up afraid and uncertain and fought anyway. The version that took pain and transformed it into something useful instead of letting it destroy her. "Do you ever regret it?" Adrian asked, reading her mood. "London, the life you could have had if Julian hadn't been an idiot?" "Never." Elena said it without hesitation. "That life would have been comfortable and empty. This life is difficult and meaningful. I'll take meaningful over comfortable every time. Even when our daughter inevitably starts questioning aristocratic privilege and demanding we redistribute our wealth?" "Especially then," Elena laughed. "We're raising a revolutionary. It's exactly what this world needs." Their manor appeared on the hillside, solid and permanent, but somehow less intimidating than when Elena had first arrived. It had become home not because she'd adapted to it, but because she'd transformed it into something that served purpose beyond simply existing. Inside, Mrs. Thornby had dinner waiting and opinions about everything. They ate as a family, Duchess and Duke and future revolutionary and housekeeper who refused to call herself a housekeeper, talking about the day's challenges and victories and plans for tomorrow. Later, after their daughter was sleeping and the house had quieted, Elena stood at her window looking out at Northshire. Lights flickered in the village where families lived, some still struggling, some beginning to thrive, all gradually learning that the systems that controlled them weren't inevitable but chosen, and that different choices were possible. She thought about Robert Thorne, diminished but not destroyed, probably still bitter about the woman who'd exposed him. She thought about Julian and Louisa, wherever they'd ended up, hopefully finding honesty, if not happiness. She thought about the London society that had scandalized her name and then forgotten her completely, which turned out to be the greatest gift they could have given. But mostly she thought about tomorrow, about the students who'd arrive wanting to learn, about the systems still needing disruption, about the lives she could influence not by being perfect, but by being present and honest and willing to fight for things that mattered. The war she'd started wasn't over, probably would never be completely over. There would always be men like Thorne, systems like the ones he'd built, people who preferred control to fairness, but there would also always be people willing to question, to learn, to fight for something better. Elena had learned to be one of those people, and she'd taught others to be them too. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything she'd been meant to become when she'd walked into that London ballroom with her head high and her heart broken. She just hadn't known it yet. Adrian appeared behind her, his reflection joining hers in the window glass. "What are you thinking about?" "How strange it is that the worst thing that ever happened to me led directly to the best thing." Elena leaned back against him. "If Julian hadn't betrayed me, I'd be trapped in London playing Duchess to a man who didn't value me. Instead, I'm here, building something that matters, teaching people to question, raising a daughter who'll probably terrify us both." She paused. "It's funny how devastation becomes transformation if you survive it long enough. You didn't just survive it, you weaponized it." "Is that what I did?" "You took humiliation and turned it into purpose. You took rejection and turned it into education. You took every attempt to destroy you and used it as fuel to build something better." Adrian pressed a kiss to her temple. "That's not survival. That's victory." Elena considered that. Victory had always seemed like something definitive, a final triumph that ended struggle. But maybe real victory looked like this: ongoing fight, perpetual challenge, daily choice to keep showing up despite fear and uncertainty and the knowledge that you'd make mistakes. Maybe victory wasn't winning once. Maybe it was choosing to keep fighting. She turned in Adrian's arms, looking at this man who'd offered her escape and gotten revolution instead, who'd wanted a partner and found one who'd disrupt everything he'd inherited. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For believing I could be more than London's scandal or Julian's cast-off. For offering me space to become whoever I was supposed to be." "You would have become her anyway," Adrian said. "I just happened to be standing nearby when you did." Outside, Northshire slept. Inside, a duchess who'd once been broken taught herself to be whole. And somewhere in between those two states, broken and whole, devastated and transformed, running away and building something permanent,
Elena Blackthorne found exactly what she'd been running toward all along. Not rescue, not redemption, not revenge, just purpose, just meaning, just the fierce, complicated, entirely imperfect life she'd needed without knowing she needed it. And that, finally, definitely, completely, was enough.